And at the beginning of it all, our protagonist is at peace. While buying something at a convenience store, the newspaper reports that due to a dust storm, it's very difficult to have a clear view of the sky that day. The protagonist is relaxed, trying to buy a bag of raffles, but the package is all open, and he wonders what the problem is. A little girl nearby asks if he's a thief secretly eating the chips, and the protagonist says that's not the case. Meanwhile, the news reports that, since the weather isn't suitable for outdoor activities, it's best to stay home. Then, an emergency report emerges, stating that a sudden earthquake is occurring in the outskirts of Seoul. For now, the earthquake's magnitude is low, and no one has been affected by the tremor. However, the monitoring station says the earthquake's magnitude is gradually increasing, and they announce that something must be done immediately. Then, everything that has fallen to the ground begins to shake, and they say that the government will do something about it. But then, the transmission starts to cut out until something appears right in the middle of the street. In front of everyone, a huge tower emerges from the ground. The protagonist tries to save the little girl, and after the tower emerges, everything is destroyed. The protagonist manages to save the little girl after the collapse, asking if she's alright while holding her in his arms. She keeps calling him a thief, asking what it is, and when he looks back, everyone, they see an absurdly large structure, and one of them appeared in England, Japan, and several other countries, including Seoul. In different cities around the world, unidentified structures appeared, and people named them Nightmare Towers. Everyone also received a notification saying they were appointed Tower Wanderers, who will save the world. The system asks if they will accept or refuse, and the first one to accept clicks on it without even thinking. That window starts to glow in front of them, and the people who accepted the summons and fell into the tower's battlefield, upon receiving the blessings of the interface system, can obtain items and abilities like in a game. But they soon realized that this was not a game at all, and the system spoke to them again, saying that soon the tower's impact will occur in their world. They begin to see the outside, surprised that this is what the exterior of the tower looks like, and everyone is working around it. One of the workers asks Ryo what that is, and up there they start to realize it's a person coming out of there, and everyone starts to think it's dangerous, telling them to call the police or something. And that thing up there is actually a demon opening its wings and claws to attack them, and its mouth is already full of terrifying teeth, and then it lets out a roar, and from that roar emerge several other monsters, and thus a catastrophe occurs where monsters descend from the tower to the ground. It's called the Tower Impact, and with that, the emergency sirens are activated, but destruction begins to occur and everyone needs to flee, and the army tries to do something, but faced with those gigantic monsters, they are crushed very quickly, and because of the monsters coming out of the tower, a third of the entire population was exterminated. And the people near the tower had no choice but to watch, and the system congratulates them again, saying they have been named as a tower that will save the world, asking if they wish to accept the summons. After that demonstration, they begin to want to climb, noticing that the message said they really can save the world. And if they attack the tower from yesterday, they think this nightmare will surely end. The last hope of humanity, having gained special powers and abilities to prevent the end of humanity, the Wanderers begin to attack the tower. At one point during their exploration, they run into a rock they can't get past. One of them questions what the problem is, asking if they can't just break it. Another asks the other if he really thinks the problem can be solved in such an ignorant way, but one of them notices that it actually worked. Another calls the team leader, telling him to take a look at something, and notices a shiny stone lying on the ground. When they pick up the stone, they discover it's the return stone, which goes back in time and sends the user to the moment they left. Summoned to the tower, the user's memories remain intact, and the stone can be split and used separately. Do you really think a tower that's trying to deforest the world is going to give you a stone to go back in time so easily in front of everyone? Oh, that's not how the cliche works, and they're surprised that you can go back in time using that, thinking it can't be true. After all, how could such a stolen item exist? And so, the team leader tells everyone that he's going to use it and confirm it's his own, and that he is Quan Yin Shang. He uses it and shines in front of everyone, then disappears, leaving them behind. Everyone is surprised. He really disappeared. But they question whether the team leader will be able to return, thinking that even if they went back to the past, they shouldn't keep appearing in the present. But Sakamoto tells them that perhaps it's normal, because Quan Yin Shang must have returned to the past of that world. However, since a part of the timeline was divided, he can no longer meet with him. Sakamoto began to explain what happened using scientific theories, such as the multiverse theory and the theory of parallel universes. His current situation is that the universe's timeline was divided, meaning that the moment Quan Yin Shang returned to the past, he became completely different from the Quan Yin Shang he used to be in his world. Everyone there was surprised by his explanation, but Sakamoto says he knows they don't understand what he said and states that in any case, the only certainty is that Quan Yin Shang returned to the past. But just because he went back to the past doesn't mean anything would change in this world. And Sakamoto says that as far as he knows, the items from the tower have never lied before, and this stone will cause them all to return to the world in a divided timeline. Of course, this is just a hypothesis. They can't ignore the possibility that everyone who uses that stone will end up in the same timeline. After all, the items from the tower surpass humanity's common sense, and at that moment, the second tower impact happened in the world outside the tower, and with that, the monsters reappeared there. And before all of humanity on Earth was annihilated, the Wanderers must make a decision whether they use the return stone to go back in time, or they would simply stay in the tower and die. And apparently that's what's happening to them, with several dying as they advance into the tower, trying to kill the tentacled monster. One of them begs to be saved, but ends up being eaten by that thing without any mercy. So, they think that now that things have reached this point, it's time to use that stone. But one of them still stands firm, and another says he's sorry, saying there's no hope. Using that thing, and disappearing beside him, the redhead falls to the ground, almost being caught by that monster. But then someone appears and completely chops the monster to pieces, saving the boy. The guy who arrived chopping up the monster asks the boy if he's alright, and he says yes. The rest of the P10 group arrives, surprised, and all those wretches have fled. Then the redhead, seeing all this, starts to cry, and one of them thanks him for having resisted until the end, and they were humanity's hope. People who did not succumb to the temptation of the return stone and wanted to protect the present and not the past. The last squad of humanity, and that squad was called Karp Dee. I think at this point in the internet age, everyone already knows what it means, but if not, just ask Gugu. But then, that same Karp Dee, in a moment not so distant from there, is completely ruined, and the protagonist, in a horrible moment of his life, wonders where everything went wrong. A while before, they were fighting a masked monster, and that same guy with the brown hair lunges at him, telling Yaren to go now. The protagonist charges, telling him to relax, saying he's going to kill that thing now, and they manage to completely chop the monster to pieces, killing it. Then, the protagonist asks if anyone died, and his friend says that fortunately, he thinks not, and those who were injured will also recover after a good rest. He says that at this rate, it might even be possible to reach the top floor, and everyone is happy after the battle, smiling at the two of them. Then the protagonist notices something, seeing on the ground a dragon suppressing greatsword, and that is the sword that the Phantom Tiger, the master of the 85th floor, forged during 1,000 days and 1,000 nights to kill a dragon, containing the energy of the sun and the moon, and he realizes that a stronger weapon has appeared. And just as Young Won said, he doesn't know if it will be possible to reach the top floor, but he will try. And he says that he thought everything was going smoothly, but at the moment, he is in deep trouble in the boss's room. On the 99th floor, Young Won's room, and that monster is face to face with the protagonist, ready to unleash a heat blast on him, and in that, all his friends are finished there. And when he tries to look back, the monster punches him, throwing him against the wall, sticking him like a mosquito, and the protagonist starts bleeding. Then he thinks that it's no use, and realizes that everything they went through together, all those times, was just for that pathetic death. But as he looks ahead, he is surprised. Seeing that same friend of his, charging at the monster, trying to cut it, delivering to blows right behind the monster's head, and he keeps hitting the monster, telling Jae-hwan to get up, and keeps shouting while attacking, and he says that he can't defeat that bastard alone. But while he attacks the monster, he quickly turns around looking back, and plunges his horn right into the protagonist friend, impaling him through the stomach, killing him instantly, and Jae, seeing that, starts screaming and roaring, but when he charges at the monster, he swings his friend, running with him on his horn, and in doing so, the monster goes up against a wall, impaling the boy, and ending any chance he had of still being alive. And the protagonist, seeing that, is consumed by hatred, grabs his weapon, and charges at the monster. But while he is running towards that thing, he sees a kind of energy flowing to the tip of one of the monster's scales, and he questions what that light is, assuming that this might help him. He goes straight to that point, attacking and managing to finish off the monster, killing it completely. He begins to writhe in that utterly exhausted place, then goes after Ahwan. But the boy is lying in the corner, totally defeated. He notices that the boy already has a colorless return stone in his hands, and the protagonist is quite surprised. This happens while the one apologizes to him. The protagonist is surprised, wondering who the one is, saying that because the boy never stopped smiling, even in that cruel tower. The walkers nicknamed him the Smiling Knight, but at that moment, he says that that Smiling Knight has lost his smile for the first time. At that point, the protagonist tells him to go, telling him to disappear before he changes his mind, and so he leaves the wand behind. The wand wonders if he noticed, saying that he thinks that stone looks very worn. With his last strength, he manages to get up and goes on thinking. The protagonist, saying that he is much stronger than he thought, and thanks to him he is convinced that it is possible to reach the top of this tower. As long as he is there, of course it will work, and he is relieved that he is in this world. So he jumps out of one of the tower windows, falling outside. Meanwhile, the protagonist reaches the last door, remembering everything he went through with his friend, but still, he thinks he needs to move forward, passing to another floor. Then, arriving on that floor, he is surprised by the glacier, noticing that he is in a snowy field. And in the middle of that snowy field, the protagonist is facing several enormous monsters that begin to attack him, and several ice spikes form there. But one of those monsters continues after him, cursing the protagonist, asking if he has already given up. But then, Jiriam turns to him, saying that he's not giving up no matter what, questioning if he's tired of playing games with him, and the monster attacks once more, until the protagonist manages to go directly into a tunnel. And the monsters keep searching for him, and from inside the tunnel, he can see everything. From outside, the monster asks if he's going to keep doing this useless thing of hiding. But then Jiriam, inside, tries to heal his frozen arm and tells him that it's been 10 years since he arrived on the 99th floor, and even though he went through countless crises on the 98th, the level of danger on the 99th was incomparable to all the lower floors, so he suffers a lot from that ice. And the boss of the 99th floor is the ice dragon, Velshizus, and the breath of this dragon, which came from the Forgotten Land, was difficult to withstand even with the highest possible level of cold resistance. And he says that if it weren't for the equipment left by the wanderers who departed, he would have died a long time ago. And the Supreme Dragon's sword, which he got on the 85th floor, and the Ice Demon armor that Yen Young gave him, and also what he has on his arm, the Flame King's bracelet, and he thinks of Hanseo and Yu. And he sees the girl right in front of him, remembering her, apologizing to her, saying that if he had been stronger, things would have been different. He remembers her death, but then he calls Jiriam, who is startled. The blacksmith asks if he's thinking of facing that again, and the protagonist says yes, saying that he truly feels he can win this time. The blacksmith of Outpost, Jay, asks if that's true, saying it's a relief. This is the village that was conquered after defeating Altimianos, the boss of the 50th floor, Outpost. Even though dead or wounded wanderers arrived every day, the people never lost hope. The priest established emergency rescue units to rescue warriors who could no longer fight, and the blacksmiths in the workshops created free equipment for the wanderers who fought for the good of humanity. The protagonist speaks to Jay, saying that it seems he is now the last blacksmith in. Adipose then asks the boy not to remind him of it, as he is his only client, and more importantly, it seems that lately there are no more supplies coming from the lower floors, as he no longer has any ores. He says that there were still some more supplies until a few months ago, and the protagonist thinks that this was to be expected, because there are almost no humans living in the tower anymore. He says he doesn't know what year it is, but 10 tower impacts have happened so far. And from a certain point, people were no longer summoned to the summoning field on the first floor to climb the tower. He begins to think that the humans in the tower were massacred, and at that point, Jay can't even speak, but asks the protagonist if there's anything bothering him. And nowadays, while he goes up and down the tower, even though the tower is still the same as always, he says that when he stops to think about that place where the return stone was. Upon discovery, there were some strange writings. They were talking about a tower inside a tower, and a nightmare within a nightmare, and he says it might have been written by someone else, but he doesn't know what it means, and he thinks it's nothing special. But then Jay says that 2 days ago, Grandma Helene disappeared, and he says that's impossible. To grow old inside the tower, and if someone disappears inside, it's for one of two reasons, either returning to the past or jumping from the tower. Helene and Helene's potions and Jay in Jay's workshop were the few remaining support walkers. Jay grows increasingly apprehensive about this, hammering away at his iron. The protagonist speaks to Jay, asking him to please teach him the skill of blacksmithing. Jay immediately stops his hammer, and the protagonist realizes that's what he needed. Now with the ice dragon, he asks the protagonist if he's finished the game of hide and seek, saying that no human has managed to reach the 99th floor alone since the tower was built. The dragon says he'll recognize him because he's an incredible human, and the protagonist doesn't like that at all, as the last thing he'd recognize would be a monster, not a human. He says he'll feel empty after killing him. After all, it was him who recognized him. But the dragon then tells the protagonist that this is impossible. Jay Ryung cries out, how could he know? Even the armor he's so proud of is starting to show cracks. The dragon doesn't like what he's saying at all, preparing another icy breath, calling the protagonist incredibly arrogant and saying that enough is enough. But as he prepares to attack the protagonist, Jay Ryun steps into the blast, and the protagonist is indeed hit. The breath throws him far away, pinning him to a glacier. He's almost completely frozen, bloodied, and badly injured by the dragon's attack. The dragon says he will fight to the end, even if he tries to resist persistently. But in the end, the fate he will face is crushing loneliness. Then, someone is calling Jay Ryun, waking him up again, and several ice statues of his friends appear. Dead creatures appear near him, while the dragon speaks of the emptiness he will feel. But then the protagonist calls the dragon, telling him he talks too much, escaping from those hands, escaping the illusion the monster created, and launching another attack. delivering a thrust. But the dragon, tired of that thrust after all the talking, tells him to give up, saying he can't defeat him with that ability. However, the protagonist continues with the same attack, explaining that he started raiding the tower after other people, and because of that, he lost things like abilities and secret classes every time. That's why he gave up other abilities and focused only on one, the thrust. He advanced and advanced again, and having killed more than 50 million monsters with his thrust, his companions thought his nickname was Thrust, and he felt that this thrust was undergoing a change. Fast, more precise, and stronger, and as a result, this thrust ceased to be a simple movement and began to gain attack power, comparable to a secret skill. And because it wasn't a skill, he never got tired, because it didn't consume spirit power, and even if that were the case, it's kind of tough, and the single scratch, after hundreds of thrusts, is too much, and he attacks once more, the same spot on that monster. But the dragon opens its mouth again to unleash another ray, and the protagonist thinks that it's too late to dodge, but he senses something. While the monster is smothering him, that same line appears in his vision, that light, and he thinks it's the same light he saw on the 98th floor. So, he needs to concentrate completely, thinking of the strongest thrust of his life, and that thrust goes into the monster's belly, causing absurd damage to the dragon, which starts calling out to him, its mouth already all swollen, the opportunist having lost an eye, asking how he dares. The protagonist is surprised that it wasn't enough, saying that he should have finished him off once and for all. But then the dragon opens its wings, telling him not to show off after a single blow, saying that it will finish him off for good now. My friend, the size of the dragon, I thought it was much smaller, and the dragon unleashes several of those breath blasts on the protagonist, breaking everything and trying to hit him, and that's it. Ruan barely escapes, distraught that the dragon is launching more attacks from midair, realizing he has no chance of winning. Then the dragon descends near him, falling with its paws and mouth aching. It tells the human it's a pity, suggesting that if there were 10 more humans like him, they could defeat it. But the protagonist tells it to shut up, as it's acting tough despite its broken body. The dragon says that if its race hadn't been deceived by the Dream Demon Stone, its destiny would have been completely different. Hearing this, the protagonist is surprised and questions the Dream Demon Stone, asking what the dragon is talking about. The dragon doesn't answer, obviously, and begins attacking the protagonist without explanation. The protagonist jumps back, fleeing the dragon, and runs through a door, closing there. He thinks that was a close call, because if his claw had managed to scratch him, he would have died, since his HP is very low. But then he starts to remember what the dragon told him, already completely exhausted. Thinking about that stone, the Dream Demon, and so 5 years later, he returns once again, thereafter the dragon, and finally manages to kill it, because he has earned the title of Nightmare of the 99th floor, and his level reaches its limit, and his vitality also reaches its maximum, and his martial skills also reach their maximum, and his agility goes along with it. Then he gets a little discouraged, noticing that too many windows have appeared, and this after having defeated that thing. But then he talks to the dragon, asking what the Dream Demon Stone is, and it says that he should already know the answer to that question, saying that he will learn about everything on the last floor, and he finally gets the Ice Dragon Sword, a black sword imbued with the breath of the Ice Dragon, Jesus. And it is said that the blade of the sword reveals itself when its master wishes to fight, and he notices that it looks nothing like a sword, and throwing himself at a dagger. But then, out of nowhere, a door appears made of dragon's blood, and finally, the top floor. And so he prepares to enter that place, but as he enters, the name on that door changes from blood to the control room. And when the protagonist emerges from that blacking, he sees something in front of him, realizing that this place holds the image of everything that has happened to him so far. And he notices that this is the current appearance of the tower, noticing the summoning field, the atoms, and everything there. Then someone speaks to him, surprised that he has already arrived, saying that he thought he would return to the village sooner. But then he tells the protagonist that he doesn't need to be nervous, as he simply forgot to send him an important message, telling him to wait there for a moment, as he will arrive soon, telling him to stay calm, and says that even though it may seem good on the outside, it is actually an antique, so it will be quite difficult to use. And then he receives a message, right in front of him, congratulating him, saying that he is the first person to complete all the tutorials in World 294, and his incredible achievement has been recorded in the records, the Immortals, the Akashic records, and this record will only be visible to the monarchs of the Great Land. And the protagonist is frightened seeing this, asking what it all means, about it being a tutorial with all his friends dead, and he becomes desperate upon learning all this. Then that person questions if it was too big a surprise, saying he hopes he won't be surprised for too long, otherwise he might end up being swallowed by his emotions. But he says it seems a bit late to say that, but tells him not to be so upset, as he did very well for a human. However, he notices something, realizing that the protagonist is unshaken there. Looking deep into his eyes, noticing that he recovered much faster than he imagined. And the protagonist questions who that wretch is, and that tiger realizes he said so much without even introducing himself, saying that he was just very happy to meet him and to think that he would reach the 100th floor alone. This has never happened before, saying that his name is Beastrin, and he is the master demon of the Tower of Nightmares, which he has just completed. And the protagonist questions whether, when he says that everything now was a tutorial, he means that the real game is yet to begin. He notices that the boy is excellent at understanding things, but first there's something he needs to show him. He snaps his fingers, and then he sees a memory of himself while questioning if it was a game. The protagonist is startled looking at it, and Beastrin says that they were all so young, and it's been a long time since he saw that. He remembers each of the missions they did, and he says that there are faces that can no longer be seen, and there, right there, at any moment now. At that moment, he says he's sure they didn't expect what would happen next, a terrible and tragic future, and he says he cried a lot watching it. Then asks if the protagonist remembers everything now, the sadness, the anger, the regret, saying that it's normal to feel useless emotions when confronted with the past, saying that he will give him another chance, saying realizes he can restart the game, and he questions whether there isn't an incredible benefit, saying that this is something that would only happen in a novel in his world, or that he can absolutely start all over again with his current memories. The protagonist then wonders if this isn't the end, wondering if he shouldn't have saved the world after climbing the tower, since the message at the beginning said he would save the world. He realizes he was tricked by Beastrin, that horrible thing in front of him, and he notices that from the beginning everything was a lie. They couldn't stop the tower's impacts, and the only thing they could do was keep climbing the tower, because the salvation of humanity was just a false hope. But then the protagonist says he's sure he knows very well that he won't go back to the past. And Beastrin notices with a sarcastic laugh, bursting into laughter in front of the protagonist, his mouth widening in front of the boy, questioning if he's still talking about the past, saying he'll leave the things become clear to him, no item in the tower, or the great land will be able to send him back to the past, saying that there isn't a stolen item strong enough to send someone there. The protagonist questions what he means by that, since surely there was an item called the Return Stone in the tower. But then he finally remembers when the Ice Dragon told him that if his race hadn't been tricked by the Dream Demon Stone, their destiny would have been completely different, and here he's a fool. The protagonist finally realizes the truth, so Beastrin speaks to him, asking to correct something, saying that it's not the Return Stone, it's the Dream Demon Stone, and the Dream Demon Stone doesn't send the user back to the past. They are only trapped in the dreams created by the Dream Demon. He couldn't even imagine, until they reached the 67th floor, that there was a race so obsessed with going back to the past, and the only ones who had this obsession were him and the humans. The protagonist agrees, and Beastrin speaks to the protagonist, asking if they're going to start the real game, saying it's not about going back to the past, just playing the game from the beginning. Again, saying he trusts the protagonist will make the most logical decision. However, the protagonist rejects this immediately, and Beastrin doesn't understand anything. The protagonist then says that thanks to him, he knows what the tower is, and something appears behind Beastrin, surprising him. The information that appears is the name of the Tower of Nightmares tutorial mode, and the explanation is that it's also known as the Fortress of Regrets, the second creation of the Nightmare creator, the Dream Demon, Mueller. It places those who agreed to be summoned to the tower into dreams fabricated by the Dream Demon. He says he's already entered the Dream Demon's dream that the tower created, so in that case, he will hunt him down. And so, finally, they move on to the next floor, and then, the guy goes crazy. He's going to hunt down the admin, ban the admin from the server itself. But Beastrin questions this next floor, saying that there's no such thing, and that this is the end of that tower. But the protagonist says he no longer believes what he says, and Beastrin questions whether the completion rewards were insufficient. He says that he'll continue with his miserable memories because of the rewards, but the protagonist lunges at him, stabbing him and tearing off part of his head. But Beastrin starts talking even with his throat slit dots, saying that everything is alright, asking what he wants, if it's a secret item, a secret ability, saying he'll give him anything because Haiwan deserves it, but the protagonist says he doesn't need anything like that. Then Beastrin questions if he doesn't want to return to his original world, and tells him that since Haiwan foresaw what's inside the Nightmare Tower dream, he's sure he already foresaw it, but there's no such thing as the tower impact. The protagonist questions what he's talking about, and then he starts showing all the living people outside, and the protagonist is quite surprised to see this, questioning what's happening. Wilson Trem passes around his body, and he watches those people living their daily lives. Beastrin starts laughing, saying that he finally understands the situation, and to think that nobody died, asking if it's not surprising, his family, his friends, for special people like him. He supposes this is incredible news, and the detail is that the guy he's looking at is literally the protagonist of the omniscient Akiya game, says that this guy is reading something very strange, and then he goes back to talking to Haihuan, saying that he almost forgot to show him the most important thing, and he is taken taken inside a hospital, where a doctor asks how the patients are doing, and another says that they haven't regained consciousness yet, and the protagonist sees himself, and Beastron asks if he isn't surprised by his appearance, saying that decades have passed, but in his world only a measly month has passed, and besides, he will never be able to defeat him. Compared to him, who barely managed to finish the tutorial, there is a level difference as great as that between humans and dragons, and the protagonist begins to think that this is a relief, because if they are talking about dragons, he has hunted them before, and Beastron says that he is arrogant, but the protagonist attacks him again, and then, once again, he returns inside the tower, along with several potions. Then he goes he's near where High One should be, but since everything is ruined and abandoned, he starts forging it himself. He says that 72 days have passed, including that one, and he's challenged him every day without rest. No matter how hard he attacks, he can't even leave a scratch. However, he doesn't die either. He doesn't know why, but he has no intention of killing him. That's why, no matter how many days or years it takes, he still wants to kill him. But Beastron isn't liking this very much. After all, he needs to restrain himself, and this guy is a product he's going to sell, a very special product. As a cultivator, it's his first time seeing something like this, and a cultivator ensures that a product will adapt safely to the Great Earth, using secondary processes to improve the product. The primary process is selecting the seeds, so that only the truly good ones remain, and the process that is done through the tutorial to find good products. And with that, the chosen products can begin. The goal is for them to truly evolve through the real game. And so the secondary process is to provide water and fertilizer to the chosen seeds to make them grow. But if there is a product that refuses to advance to the next stage, you simply close your eyes and kill it, because its soul is not destroyed if you die in the tower. But what if its soul is wounded, because there is a difference between the two? He's surprised by this, thinking about the superiors watching him, saying that the cultivators won't stand idly by. He has to create it flawlessly and sell it, because he thinks it's time to ascend and become a high-ranking demon. He also has to repay the loan he used to buy that tower, and it's such a special product that even the gods, who normally don't make deals with demons, have contacted him. Beastron starts to get angry, thinking he's driving him crazy, and the protagonist attacks him again. He questions what the hell he wants, because he's sure that's a reason for his behavior. He seriously asks the protagonist if he doesn't get tired of this, because if he listened and started the real game, everything would be easier. But then he says that people in his world would say that's the best option, questioning why the boy is doing all this. But then he continues attacking him, and Beastron loses his temper, getting up. There's a wall between them, so he watches the protagonist from behind the wall. The protagonist attacks while looking back, but ends up getting caught. Beastron grabs Beastron's hand and starts begging him to answer, questioning what he wants, since he's saying he'll give him secret items or abilities. He asks why he insists on doing something so useless, but J1 says he'll hunt him down and go to the next floor again, as if a Pokemon were saying his name. Beastron gets angry that the boy is saying this again, asking what he needs to do to get to the real game. The protagonist thinks he's got him, saying it was good he resisted until he reached his limit. Then the protagonist says he has something he wants to ask him, and after making the request, Beastron tells him not to be surprised, saying that his universe isn't actually made up of just one dimension. The protagonist simply says he already knows, and Beastron is surprised, asking if the boy is by any chance a genius. He says that everyone knows this, saying that the parallel universe is a multiverse. This kind of thing exists on Earth too. Then Beastron says he'll explain it to him in more detail. There's a main dimensional level called Great Earth, and below it there are countless branching alterations. And Earth is a small planet in a dimensional system separate from the countless alterations, and they call that planet World 294, and in the land of nightmares, wanderers can gain skills and items and improve their attributes. Then they will adapt to the Great Earth system, and they gain a chance to travel to another world. And demons like him have the role of supporting these games. Oh, I don't know. I think some of the demon's eyes were taken from Naruto. Here's Sage Mode. Down there the Renegade is appearing. If you look closely, there's a Sharingan there. I don't know. I think there was some copying there. But the protagonist questions why he is doing something like this. But Beastron says that he doesn't actually believe it, which is really making him curious. He mentions that, given the countless alterations, why was the Tower of Nightmares summoned to his world? He asks why he and his family were forced into such a fate. He says his world was chosen simply by chance, but the protagonist says that's enough. He asks why someone like him is operating the Tower of Nightmares, and Beastron questions what he's talking about. The protagonist then asks what he gains from this kind of work, and he starts to throw out an idea without being able to answer, saying that it could be considered a kind of volunteer work he does. But he begins to notice that he doesn't seem to believe a single word he's saying, and he and the demons quite like to volunteer. And there are many demons among them who help special wanderers on different planets. And there's a place called Paradise, where men and demons below humans live together in peace. But above his head, a message from the monarch about cultivating the product appears before the protagonist's eyes. Beastron questions whether he should finally believe him, and the protagonist doesn't believe him at all, as he knows too much. Then he begins to see his own information, realizing that his level is very high, and everything in his status is at the maximum level and has reached its limit. He thinks that now he has no ability to evolve, but still he cannot reach it. Thinking about this, he becomes somewhat discouraged, and he wonders if humans can really be reduced to nothing, and perhaps the system of that world is wrong. But then he feels something, wondering what it was, because he is sure it was a very strange sensation. Realizing that it is something that shouldn't be there, he begins to see several particles in the air and wonders if this is a hallucination. Then he picks up one of those particles that breaks into several drifting dust particles through the air, and he says that these were fine particles, and then they took the form of a sugar cube, and each time they changed, they took a different shape. These particles were the essence of this world, and no matter the shape, he instinctively understood what it was. In the present, he is basically reading the evil that Strang is trying to do to him regarding this volunteer work, and questions him about the monarch, asking if he is the king. Strang asks if he has finally become interested, saying that the monarchs are the protectors of the Great Land, and generally, those who complete this game proceed to the Great Land, and they will receive the support of the monarchs. But the protagonist questions this support, and Strang says that depending on which monarch he chooses, his future will also change. And if he follows what he's saying, Strang will swear by his name and use all his powers to help him choose a great monarch, of course. This only applies if he's willing to participate in the real game until the end. The protagonist says he seems like an insurance salesman and is acting like one, and is surprised, saying that he's not acting like that at all. And the protagonist says he understands, saying that he will do what he is saying that in exactly 10 days he will leave this place. And so, 9 days later, the protagonist continues training, and Strang is watching him, noticing that he's been doing that crap all day, but thinks it's alright, as he just needs a little more patience, and they're almost done. He bought that stupid tower because he was tricked by those bastards, getting angry that it's all the fault of those damn scammers. He says they claim the tower was personally built by a master, and that it was a first-generation activity whose age couldn't be measured. He says that if it were a third-generation tower, there would be a function to force the end of the tutorial without damaging the rewards. But he can't finish the game without making a deal for the rewards because of that damn first-generation tower. So he gets very angry with the protagonist because of that, but says it's alright, judging what he can do, saying that being poor is a sin, saying he'll just use it since it works well. But he says that tomorrow will be the end, and then on the day the protagonist is in, he receives several messages, one of which discusses the final summary of the Great Earth, talking about increasing adaptation to become an adapter, and a place he must visit even if it means dying 12 zones of the Great Earth. The message teaches the protagonist everything he needs to know. A new message appears, stating that the game's doctor wants to end the tutorial, and he will return to World 194 without losing any of his memories, and the real game will begin. Persephone asks if he memorized all the information, and the protagonist says yes, thanking him. She then tells him to quickly press the accept button, saying he's waited so long for this day and is overjoyed. However, the protagonist attacks her, making him disappear. He then speaks to Joanne, questioning what he's doing as the protagonist is attacking him again. Joanne says he should know just by looking, because from now on, he will hunt him down and return to. He attacks Persephone again, and he says that after managing to see the particles, the thrusting motion of his sword became unstable, and each time he thrust, he has a strange feeling of discomfort, and it's as if it were an awakening of sensations. So he continues thrusting, killing Persephone time after time, and he wonders if this is the feeling of being alive. But then he ends up being caught by something, and Besitron throws several tentacles at the boy. And here it is the black iron tree, a plant from the 91st floor. And he says that he has never seen anyone like the protagonist before, which would have been easier for both of them if it had been like this before. Asking if the protagonist doesn't agree, then the protagonist questions what he will do, saying that he won't be able to end this game without his consent. And so Besitron says that's true, and honestly, he gave up on getting his consent a long time ago. And this time he's going to ask him a question, asking why. He thinks this tutorial never ends, saying that this nightmare tower is programmed to shut down automatically 100 days after the tutorial is completed, and at that the protagonist gets scared. But Besitron talks to Joanne, saying that he just needs to hold her and to make him silently participate in the real game later. And so the protagonist speaks with Besitron, asking if in the Great Land he is called the Temple of Provocation, and Besitron is frightened by this. And the protagonist says that he has lived for 784 years so far, and it has been a total of 128 worlds, and he continues to use his horrible cultivation on the target tribes. And then Besitron asks how he knows, and Joanne says that he was planning to deliver him to the Dark Monarch, called the Mathematician, and Besitron is terrified, questioning who he is, because all that information appears above his head, and the protagonist finds it strange that he asks who he is. After all, he is the prize he has been creating there for several years. But then he says that he will no longer be freeing himself from the plant that Besitron used to bind him, and then when the protagonist breaks free, he immediately lunges at Betrayal with a thrust. And he is afraid of the attack now. Sweating profusely, deflects the protagonist's attack, and things finally start to go wrong. He feels the attack right where it hit his left shoulder, and he starts screaming, thinking this can't be possible, questioning how the boy was doing it. The attack begins to glow blue, and Betrayal wonders if he achieved hyper-adaptation. The boy did, and his sword evolved, becoming a gigantic sword. The protagonist reaches another level. He says that after reaching the 100th floor, he had doubts, and he began to wonder if this was also part of the dream. He doubted, wondering if this guy couldn't kill him, and doubted again, questioning if being human meant he could be indefinitely restored like that, and the essence of the world was being destroyed. The conversation began, and that was the end of his numerous doubts. He says he arrived at a place where there were no more doubts, and he reached an understanding. And after understanding this, he begins to attack Betrayal, who starts defending himself as if his life depended on it, because apparently it does. He's scared shitless. Then he yells to be able to connect, and it's said that the agreed upon temporal restrictions have been removed, and he reverts to his prime form, and the creature becomes even stronger. He then says he won't level up with him anymore, ordering the protagonist to surrender now. He starts cutting the boy all over, and Betrayal says that even though he's incredibly talented, having managed to adapt around quickly after finishing the tutorial, this is already the limit of how far humans can go, saying that he can't defeat him, the great Betrayal. Then he starts launching spikes from the ground, which go towards the protagonist and begin to pierce him. But then the protagonist wonders if this is how it will all end. But he ends up gripping his sword even more firmly, and the numbers keep counting. And so he attacks more and more times, until he reaches 9,999,999,999. And so Betrayal says that he will need to participate in the real game anyway. And by doing this to him, he is the one who loses, and with that the protagonist. In the end, the attack turns to 10 billion thrust, and he begins to realize, questioning if it's really happening. Then he takes that same line, which leads to the enemy's weak point, and questions what's happening, as he's disintegrating as if it were a bug. Betrayal is even more surprised, saying that it's not a bug, it's just adaptation, questioning how he reached this level. Then the protagonist's attack goes to him, tearing through Betrayal and managing to hit him. After the attack lands, Betrayal falls to the ground, completely defeated. The protagonist tells him to listen one last time, while Betrayal thinks that what he experienced was an awakening. The protagonist then says that humans are not things that he can treat as merchandise, saying that they are not mere stepping stones for him to use as he pleases. Betrayal has been reduced to a tiny kitten, at least a kitten of an ugly thing, that the poor little thing is suffering. Then the protagonist says that they are not products that he can put a price on, and he will no longer follow their plan, saying that he will destroy that place and go up to the next floor. He starts looking at the ceiling, which is already cracked, and he says that he will continue following more and more to destroy this cursed world that they created. Now, his user information is completely erased, and everything is an enigma. Then Betrayal begs him to please stop, while pleading with the protagonist, because he is completely destroying the tower. He says that there is nothing like the next floor, but the protagonist disagrees, saying that the next floor exists. Then Betrayal becomes even more frightened, and the protagonist says that they wouldn't call him there for nothing. He remembers the 78th floor, the 66th floor, and says that the writings of anguish by a certain artist are all over that place, even on the 47th floor. He says that in the end, the entire Tower of Nightmares is just an imitation of the first demon at the top of the Tree of Illusion, and he says that this could be found in different parts of the tower. And he goes thinking at the top of the Tree of Illusion, and says that he is sure that these are the writings of Mulurk, the creator of the Tower of Nightmares, and he remembers what the system already told him, asking Betrayal if this place is the root of the Tree of Illusion. Then Betrayal is questioned about what he intends to do, and the protagonist says that if this place is the root, he is sure that there is a trunk. So if he breaks the ceiling, he will get there, and he makes a thrust with absurd power upwards. And Betrayal screams desperately, telling him not to do that to his tower. Then the protagonist thinks he has finally found what he was looking for, appearing in another place in a forest, saying that he finally found it. Kid, 10 billion thrust. The creature humiliated the demon, broke the tower, and now it has just fallen into Kingdom of the Gods. If this isn't looking good, or I'm crazy, leave a like. And let's continue with this video. And so, as soon as the protagonist arrives in that world suddenly, several wolves begin to surround him. He's already in a very bad situation when the wolves attack. He kills the first one with a light thrust, splitting the monster in half, and the others continue attacking. This time, an even bigger wolf appears, a gigantic one, and the protagonist says that, it seems, a light thrust won't be enough for that guy, so he uses a normal thrust, opening a huge hole in the middle of that thing's chest. My friend, it's the one punch man of thrust, a man's thrust. And then, after killing that thing, he rips off its horn and takes it with him. He says all the monsters there seem weak. My friend, I think you're mistaken. Maybe you did Saitama's training and lost your cool a bit. And then he hears someone talking to him, and when he looks back, he sees that they are a bunch of little green men, and apparently he ended up on Mars, and they start yelling, talking about some kind of horn, and the protagonist thinks that even with the suspicions active, he can't easily decipher their language structure. He questions them about the horn, asking if they want it, saying it's fine and they'll make a trade, and he'll give it to them if they tell him where this place is. But then one of the men lunges at him, trying to hit him. However, the protagonist speaks to the creature's antenna, saying that if he does it again, he'll kill them all. So he pulls out his sword and ends up killing everyone, asking the last one who still has a little bit of life to answer him. But he can't understand anything. However, Jowan pulls the creature's antenna, making it start cursing furiously, and the protagonist tells him to speak in a way he can understand. But the monster says he'll kill the human and ends up biting his own tongue to kill him. He says he thought they were weaklings, but he had surprising willpower. And looking at those antennas, he puts them on the ground and buries them as a sign of respect. And he says he managed to get zero information and wonders if there are at least some other items, and ends up finding a small dimensional bag among those men's things and says that it's an item that serves as inventory, thinking that it's great after all. He hasn't been able to use the system interface since he left the Tower of Nightmares. He says he thought he could use these things in all dimensions, including the Great Earth, thinking about that damned lion. But he's happy to at least be able to see information using the suspicion of a spectral crystal that increases someone's strength and spiritual power for a certain value. And he says they are different colors, but each of them was holding at least one, and he wonders if they were jewelers or something like that anyway. And this will be very valuable to him, and he says he thinks he'll have to leave the rest of the things behind, as they are too bulky. But then his dagger trembles once more, and so it begins to consume it. And the protagonist is quite surprised, thinking that there are still other things left, noticing that there is a map there. And that map is of the Mirage Tree. It's chaos, and he notices that it's a place that doesn't. He was giving information that that damn demon had given him, so he continued through the forest. But in another part of it, a group with a very striking redhead was fighting some of the wolves. Then the redhead noticed something and threw a dagger aside, hitting a guy with red dreadlocks. She started apologizing, but he said it was an accident, and she meant to throw it in the other direction. He said it was better for her to go hunt over there, and he thought he'd just let them pass because he's so cute. I think this is the new level of simp, the simp who accepts being stabbed. Meanwhile, that same girl continued hunting and started apologizing again. Everyone questioned why she was apologizing now, and why she was bringing back an absurd monster. They noticed it was the two-horned beast, and were surprised that the girl messed with the two-horned beast, telling it not to come to them. But she ran off all cute and cuddly. Then they order them to quickly regroup to face that thing, and the protagonist looks down at them. Noticing that the girl seems to be the strongest in the group, he wonders if they aren't friends because they'll all die this way, asking how they managed to get past the Tower of Nightmares being so weak. But then, the dreadlocked guy appears to save the day, ordering the group to go forward using the breath of the Flame King. Someone offers to help, but the girl is more of a hindrance than a help, and he gets very angry. She starts saying sorry, but I think he's realizing that maybe it wasn't so unintentional to insult her. She doesn't like that very much, saying he was too harsh because she was just trying to help. But he obviously doesn't believe her. His friends call him, talking about the thing in front of him, but the protagonist acts quickly before the dreadlocked guy is killed, and with a light thrust he kills the monster in one hit. The blood that spills from the monster falls all over him. The guy with dreadlocks appears, and the protagonist plunges his gigantic sword into the ground. When the dust settles, everyone sees the tough guy standing over the creature's corpse, and they start questioning who he is. After a while, when they begin to understand each other, they question whether he's really sure, asking if it's okay for his group to keep the corpse of the two-horned beast, since that's what they're talking about. The protagonist says yes, but they question if that horn is really that valuable. One of them says of course, because a two-horned beast requires at least 10 people to kill. The protagonist thinks that the one he killed earlier with a normal thrust, had 5 horns, and he believes that the more horns they have, the stronger they will be. The girl who was obviously sabotaging their plan becomes increasingly apprehensive. Then she tries to approach the protagonist by asking who he is, saying that there are no adapted beings in all of Chaos who could kill a two-horned beast with a single stab, questioning where he came from. But the protagonist, looking at her, ignores any and all questions. The girl asked, questioning what this chaos is, and the girl looks at him. It's as if he'd said something absurd, questioning what it's like, and then they start talking more, and are surprised that the protagonist even talks about what he's just talking about. Incidentally, he also said he doesn't know the local language, which everyone finds strange, as language barriers are rare there. While they're talking, the redhead keeps thinking about the protagonist, because this self-proclaimed passenger killed the two-horned beast without using any abilities. In fact, He only stabbed it once. She tries to use one of her abilities on him, but fails every time. She says her detection ability isn't working, making his assessment impossible. She wonders if his spiritual power is that of a non-adapted individual and questions who he is. She then asks a question, stating that there are few adapted individuals in chaos, and they can kill a two-horned beast with just one stab. She demands his true identity, and he asks again what chaos is. The girl questions if he's joking, but he says no. She asks why he's talking like that, and again he doesn't understand her. She questions if he doesn't. He understood what she said, wondering if identity was too difficult a word. However, the protagonist goes to her, explaining that he knows what identity means. But since he remembers everything he went through, he thinks that the relationships he had on Earth lost their meaning as soon as he entered the tower. He remembers each of his companions, and he thinks that in that place he made new companions and memories. However, they disappeared like a mirage at the end of the tutorial, and his companions are probably alive somewhere on Earth now. But if the reward for completion was to start over with intact memories, they probably can't remember him or what happened inside the tower. He says he doesn't remember his identity, and the girl says she understands now, suggesting it must be amnesia. She questions whether he really thought she would fall for that, because saying he has amnesia in such a serious tone won't work. But the protagonist says he never said he had amnesia, and the girl calls him an idiot, asking if he's the strong man of the abyss or something like that. The protagonist says he understands, telling her to stop bothering him, grabbing his weapon, and it instantly grows. The girl is surprised that he has a spiritual weapon, and that weapon starts eating the things he has in his back. She begins to think that it wasn't his strength, but the weapons, saying that showing off a spiritual weapon with such courage in front of others is something one shouldn't do. All three keep an eye on the weapon, noticing that it seems to be a spiritual weapon, and that he's giving it other equipment to power the sword. They think the protagonist is being overly sensitive, but in reality, he just wants the weapon to return to normal quickly. And the girl says she can't believe a guy like him ruined her mission, saying she could easily have taken care of that guy from Dread. But then an idea crosses her mind, and she tells the protagonist that it's okay, saying she won't talk about her identity anymore. In fact, she has a proposal to make, asking if he wants to hear it. The protagonist then says that the woman who introduced herself as Minora gave a brief explanation. From the chaos, he then spoke about his companions. She says that these guys are shameless scoundrels who belong to a clan called the Red Fox. And the protagonist says that in short, she wants him to kill these guys, and she says he'll know soon enough, and they'll surely come after him, telling him not to stare. During the night, the guy with dreadlocks says that since it's dark, they should camp there, because walking in the dark is dangerous, and they might accidentally provoke a horned beast. So they all stop around the campfire to rest, and the protagonist lies down a little further away, thinking that looking at the map, the village was very close. He starts looking at those lights again, and then he talks about the second stage of awakening, understanding. He hears everyone talking and speculating nearby, and one of them speaks to the captain, saying that his spiritual power is the same as, and even less than, that of a non-adapted person. They are surprised, because they had all noticed this, and they start to think that he only managed to kill the beast into places. The protagonist, one of them, realizes they are planning something, and they would be shocked to learn that he bought it from the root. He thinks that, according to that demon, the tower's equipment must be mediocre, and he can't believe there are people after this. He thinks that, in any case, this doesn't seem to be the Great Land. Then, a movement begins in the forest. The protagonist notices they've started moving, and the redhead runs to him, questioning what he's doing, saying they're coming. She says he has the sword that ate the equipment earlier, telling him to defeat them with it. But the protagonist says no, that he lent it to them, and they said they wanted to take a look while they stood guard. The girl is surprised that he lent her a spiritual weapon for such a crappy reason, saying there should be a limit to his stupidity and the danger. The guy with dread calls the protagonist an idiot while laughing, saying he'll make good use of his weapon. But with the red fox there, it wouldn't make a difference even if he had his own weapon. And the others start complaining because he called everyone over for the people, telling them to finish him off quickly and leave. But then the redhead curses them, asking if they really want to spill blood. And the protagonist thinks to himself, happy that he'll finally be able to see the woman's true ability, because she's ready to defend him. And then the guy with dread orders all the henchmen to kill the two, and they actually attack. But the girl grabs some kunai and hits them right in the middle of the head, killing two of them. And the third one goes in with a kick and gets hit too. And the protagonist watches from the side, while the girl says she was sorry because she thinks she threw too hard. And now she claims to be angry. And from that moment on, they will go through a truly horrible experience. And the guy from Dread says he had the feeling when she betrayed the monsters to them, asking if she really is the witch of the massacre. And the girl is ready to massacre them, then asks who made a request to the Shadow Warriors. But the girl questions what it matters. And she says that they killed so many unadapted people who know nothing. And she's sure there are several people in the chaos who want them dead. While she attacks, he dances, dodging all the daggers. And he says that there's no way the Shadow Warriors could have decided to act because of such pathetic guys. Then he starts breaking those daggers using the protagonist weapon, and he says that she must have gotten a private request, and in that case, she'll die there. But the witch questions if he wants to fight while relying on a spiritual weapon, and he says that he took other precautions. The girl sees that they are at least first stage adapted, so they are all looking at her with an absurd thirst for blood, and she realizes that there must be about 30 or even 40 of them. Then she says that she thought she sensed the presence of several others, and he questions if she thought he would have gotten into a fight without even preparing, especially against a witch of the warriors. From the shadows, there's a guy who killed a two-horned beast with a single blow. Even though he knew he could get a spiritual weapon so easily, he wouldn't have gone so far as to call the master, and that master is a guy with an absurdly psychopathic face. The witch is surprised that the black fox is there too, saying that not much must be happening lately. The fox tells her to consider it an honor. He's the master of the Red Fox clan, a third stage adapted being, and he says that more than half of the Red Fox clan has gathered to hunt him. She says it's a great honor, since they have so much free time. They should just wait a second, thinking that she's not sure if she can defeat the nomad, since he is a third stage adapted being. Then the girl calls the protagonist, who feels very sorry, saying that she didn't want to tell him this, but she won't be able to protect him. Then she tells him to grab it and run. The protagonist sees that it's a nightmare stone, questioning what it is, and she says that it's a stone of return, and when he uses it, he can escape to the nearest castle. Since it's the only one she has, he can use it. The protagonist then thinks it's not a stone to return to the past, but a stone that can save someone in the present. He questions what would have happened if he could have given Yunhuang one, instead of a stone without effects. He asks the witch if she could return to the past, but she questions whether he really has to ask such a question now, questioning what kind of weirdo he is. She says of course not, that she gave her best in her life, and if she has to die, she will die today, and she would never return to the past. And then the protagonist touches her shoulder, telling her she won't die today, pulling out another weapon, and the girl is surprised. As he charges at them, the massacre begins, and Black Fox yells for them to form the 14th Flame King formation. Several of them use fire attacks to try and attack the protagonist, and so he uses the Lost Enchantment, passing through the middle of them all, his thrust piercing each one of them, and the Black Fox manages to stop part of the protagonist's attack, but he takes that attack seriously, managing to pierce the Black Fox's chest nonetheless. Then his blood falls on the face of the Madman Dread, and he falls dead right there in front of him, and the protagonist is calm and collected, and so the last one remaining is the one with the spiritual weapon, handing it to the protagonist as if he were a servant serving his master, and after taking it, he prepares to kill everyone else, using the light thrust, finishing them all off in one go. And the girl questions what the hell that is, asking how a thrust can be like that. She says she thought he was an idiot, full of openings. So she just assumed he was an idiot, clueless about the danger, but that wasn't the case, he's just very strong. Then she calls him and asks what his true identity is, and the protagonist tells her about it, questions whether she has already forgotten, saying that she already knows his true identity, and she doesn't quite understand. He asks if she's suffering from memory loss, as he thought he was her only one. She notices he's making fun of her, demanding she return the return stone he gave her, but he says it's not there, that he lost it. She questions how he lost such a valuable item. Then they stop around the campfire once more, and he thinks that somehow it's peaceful there. But she continues shaking things, saying the stone isn't there, questioning if he's serious, asking why she has to go through all this because of a stranger. The protagonist continues feeding his hungry sore beside him, saying she must already know. She asks what he's talking about, and he says she must know his identity, saying he's human. Then she asks if he's joking, and Hairwan asks if she's human, and she says of course she is. Almost. The protagonist says that's good, so she questions the expression on his face, questioning if that's really it, questioning if it's enough that they're human. The next day, they continue walking, and the girl asks if he really doesn't have memories of entering the chaos, as well as memories of the Great Land. He says it's kind of like that, and the girl says she's really envious of him for not having those memories. He questions if amnesia is something to envy, and she says she's sure most people there are envious of him because it's obvious how everyone ended up in the chaos. The protagonist questions if it's obvious to everyone, asking how she ended up there, but then she stops and becomes serious with him, saying that when they find out what she just asked him, she's sure he'll deeply regret it. So they walk until they reach Gorgon's castle, and at the entrance, she says that they have finally arrived in a city, and the protagonist observes that what's to the side looks like the type of summoning arena that was on the first floor of the tutorial, and then he sees someone being summoned right at that moment, which he is very familiar with, and then several people appear there, completely naked, and some of them are screaming and crying, and completely lost. And the protagonist says he's familiar with people making expressions like theirs, and the witch says a whole bunch of them came this time too. And she asks if he understood what she asked him before, because asking how someone ended up in chaos is something that should never be done to someone there, so everyone arrives there suffering too much. and she says that that's the world of the dead, chaos. Then the protagonist questions if these people come to chaos or die in the Great Earth, and she says that's right, saying that dying there means the end. And when someone dies, they become nourishment for the Mirage Tree and may have died before. They won't even spill red blood, and then a squad arrives there, and their leader orders them to line up and take everyone to the auditorium, ordering everyone to get naked there, put that on their bodies and form a line. And he tells one of the boys that he died because he was too skinny, telling him to fix his posture, asking if by any chance he was a webtoon artist or something like that. But then, the witch calls James, and he's surprised, especially since she came all the way to the checkpoint. She explains that she only took this route by chance, as it's not like they're strangers, so she'd like him to let her in right away. However, he apologizes to Mino, but things have changed a bit, and now everyone entering the castle needs to provide a certificate. She's quite surprised by this, questioning if he's talking about that outdated certificate distributed by Big Brother. She asks why now, since the protagonist doesn't have the certificate either, obviously. Then she starts to get an idea, talking to James and saying she's sorry, but she ended up leaving that certificate behind, wondering if she could be allowed to pass through. He's surprised to find it's a horn from a two-horned beast. He says he checked her certificate, explaining that it's not like they're strangers after all, and everyone there is pretending to be bribed in front of her, while the girl is all happy. But then James talks to the protagonist, saying that he also needs to show his certificate, and he says that he doesn't have anything of that sort, asking if he really needs one. And then the girl says that he seems to be in trouble, saying that if he asks nicely, she might be able to help him. And James says that if he doesn't have the certificate, he can't enter the castle. And the protagonist says he understands, but he puts his hand on his waist, and the girl asks what he's doing, asking if he plans to kill the guards to get in, because no way, after all. Even if he's a complete psychopath, how could anyone even think of doing that? And she remembers that he's going to finish off James in a single move, and after finishing them all off, he was just going to ask if she wasn't going to enter, and she thinks that in fact he could. Then she asks James to wait, saying that this guy is actually with her, but then someone arrives asking what's going on there, so they both look back with a little fear, and she thinks she's screwed because he's arrived, and so all the other soldiers line up, and she says that he's a celebrity from Gorgon Castle, the least corrupt officer in the chaos, the officer of the northern checkpoint, Calton Bullhead. Then he speaks to James, asking him to explain what's happening there, and that's how he finds out, and everything. And he notices that he wants to enter the castle, but he doesn't have the certificate, and he says that they can't allow that to happen. And the protagonist questions why, and Calton questions if he wants this route, saying that when someone is unable to prove their identity with a certificate, a checkpoint officer can use their authority to prohibit the traveler's entry, and he says this as a decree, saying that it's explicit in Gorgon's entry law, Article 27, Paragraph 4, and everyone there abides by it, as they have a kind of shackle and collar attached to their bodies. And she says that he was compelled to use decree abilities, noting that things have just gotten complicated, and he says that in these cases, there is also Gorgon's imprisonment law, but the protagonist simply jabs at that decree, freeing the girl from that, telling him to stop, saying that he has no interest whatsoever in what the law says, and Calton, looking at that, is quite surprised by what the protagonist did, and he questions what it is. As stated on a certificate, Calton questions how he escaped the effects of his decree out of nowhere. Calton explains that the certificate will indicate his true name, the organization he's allied with, information about his primary class and abilities, partial status data, criminal history, spiritual corruption, and everything else. The protagonist then says that it seems he doesn't need the certificate, stating he won't certify it. However, Calton continues to question how his decree doesn't work on him. He then says that according to Gorgon's prison law, Article 2, Paragraph 7, he will arrest him now, using the silver prison. The chains move closer to the protagonist's body, who simply observes. When the chains come together, he breaks them easily, and they don't even manage to stick to his body. Everyone is surprised that he broke Calton's chain, and Calton also wonders how the boy is doing it. Then the protagonist questions whether he only needs to do what that woman did, and Milo is left wondering about what she did, remembering when she offered the horn as a bribe to get in, and he's the one who accepted the bribe, and those who covered up the bribe are scared shitless. And then the protagonist tries to throw a horn into Calton's hand, and the girl tells him to wait, and when he catches the horn, the protagonist tells him to take it and let him in, and then James is scared shitless, questioning how he dares to bribe an officer, asking if he thinks he's a bigger target, telling Calton that he deserves to be executed immediately, but Calton asks if he said his name is Jean Wan, and the protagonist confirms, and Calton says he's been waiting for him, saying that he's the envoy of the Pires Verde clan. And then, Carlton begins measuring Mino, and the device he's using identifies that the girl's spiritual corruption has exceeded 15%, and it's recommended that she medicate herself as soon as possible. Carlton says that her spirit is corrupted, saying that he doesn't even need to tell her what to do, and she says she already understands. But the protagonist doesn't understand this talk of spiritual corruption, and she notices that he really doesn't know anything, while she eats some things nearby to medicate herself. And she says she's surprised she actually managed to travel with him, and talks about spiritual corruption, which is a chronic disease. Everyone who lives in chaos gets it, and if the spirit is slowly corrupted, it will only exist there. And that's how corruption reaches its peak. You literally go to link in the bio, and she says that's why the horns of beast are so valuable, and he must have seen earlier how that guy was enchanted by the horn. And she says that the horns are the only medicinal ingredient that can alleviate the spiritual corruption of chaos. It's a necessary item for those who live there, and this despite the fact that she managed to get some thanks to a certain someone along the way. And then Calton says he's going to evaluate him using that magic eye in his hand, and when he turns on the device pointing it at the protagonist, the device shows an error, saying it's unable to measure the level of spiritual corruption. And James, looking at the screen, is very surprised because his corruption level is 0%. And Calton says he understands looking at the protagonist's hand, saying he'll return those scepter crystals now that the verification is over. And the protagonist notes that he doesn't need them, and says that scepter crystals aren't something you can give so easily to another person, calling him an envoy of the Puris Verde clan. But the protagonist says he's not an envoy or anything like that, but Calton just smiles, saying he knows that. So, as he's leaving, James talks to him, asking if it's really okay to let them go like that. And Calton talks to James, asking if he knows what kind of object the scepter crystal is. And he questions if it isn't a valuable item capable of amplifying the spiritual power of an adapted one. And James says that's correct, but it's not just that. Taking off his glove, then he shows his hand to James, who is startled, seeing how his hand is all burned. Then he asks if it was because of the crystal, and James says that it's less, that he's from the Puris Verde clan. It's not possible to handle scepter crystals. They are the only ones who can wield these crystals and avoid corruption. So even though he doesn't seem to be part of the Puris Verde clan to him, he witnessed that he can hold the crystal. But then James questions how he can trust him, but Calton says that he doesn't trust him, but he trusts his spirit. And James doesn't understand anything, and the protagonist questions if he remembers how they assessed the level of his spiritual corruption, and he says yes, saying there was an error, to which Calton replies that as far as he knows, the measuring equipment never fails. And so James questions what that was then, and he says that there's only one scenario where the device cannot measure spiritual corruption, saying that his spirit is purer than anyone else's in the chaos. So James questions how that is possible, and he says that it doesn't really matter if he is Puris Verde or not. He is simply the impression of someone who can use the crystals, and those inside the castle will judge him now. And James questions if this has to do with the condition of the castle, but Calton says he doesn't know the exact details either. However, he talks to James about something else, because from what he heard, there was a person who allowed someone to pass after being bribed, and he thinks that person's name was also James, and he gets all scared, seeing that he has been discovered. And then the protagonist starts thinking to himself, noticing that those roads are too complicated, and now he also has dead weight weighing him down. Since the girl is of no use there, he questions who is guiding her. Who's there? And he remembers that Minna got a huge lecture right in the face and ended up going crazy following him. Calton tells the protagonist that she'll be fine soon, then turns around, telling them to enjoy their stay at Gorgon Castle. He's surprised, because thinking that the effects of Uranel's decree have lasted so long is too much, as she seems to be quite a problematic person. Then he talks to someone nearby, saying he's looking for a blacksmith specializing in swords. Another person looks down, paying attention to what the protagonist is saying, and asks if there's any blacksmith capable of handling a sword of that level, once again showing his sword in public. The man says he's not sure, and the one down below apparently wants to rob the protagonist. After a while, the girl leaves again, and she asks when they enter the village. He's surprised that she finally regained her senses, saying she can go on her way then. And she asks what she's talking, asking him to wait, questioning if he's being too harsh, pushing him aside like that, but also asking if he's still angry because she tried to leave him at the castle entrance, saying it was just a joke. However, the protagonist says that she guided him to the castle, and that's enough, and from there she'll only get in his way. He looks back very seriously, saying that they are different. Guys, I don't know if you understood, but he can see her true essence. In this world, she's the one on the left. I think she'll be on the left for you. She's the real person, but he can see her true self, especially since she's a dead person, so to him, she's just a corpse. And he tells her it's better if she leaves now, and the girl doesn't even know what to say, but apparently she's going to speak anyway, asking him to wait, saying he doesn't even know his way around, and mentioning the trouble he intends to cause alone. He says he can just ask people around, but then she tells him to ask her, saying she knows that place like the back of her hand. He gives up, saying he's going to find a nightmare. but she says she has an idea of where one might be, asking if he wants her to guide him, and he agrees. But before that, he says it seems there are some guys who have business to settle with him, and everyone arrives there wanting to rob the protagonist. One of them is a real pain, and those two are the guys with the good sword, because he said it was a flaming sword, and the other one is actually a lie. It was passed on incorrectly. Mino asks who they are, telling them to get out of there if they don't want to get hurt. Then they talk to the redhead, saying she has a sharp tongue. Sharp, saying it's best to be careful not to swear, and one of them, who looks like a bull, says it's because his younger brother gets excited when he hears swear words, saying that he only has 12 years of work experience. It's impossible. This guy has about 12 years of retirement, and he says that swearing is bad for children's development, and one of them says that now, if they don't want to be trampled by their brother, it's better to hand over the blue sword, but the protagonist simply says he doesn't want to, and the girl questions if he really is the youngest. Then one of them questions what he's talking about, asking if they understood the situation, what they got themselves into, and saying that if they don't want to get hurt, they should hand over the sword now. But then the girl continues to question how that he's the youngest, telling them to stop lying. I'm with her too. Look at the size of this monster. This thing is 12 years old, where man, it's not possible. Not even if it's a cat's age. And then that monster actually lunges at her, saying he's going to punish her for the swear words. But before he can do anything, the protagonist rips off both of his arms, preventing the 12-year-old boy from growing, launching an absurd attack on the other three, destroying the house behind them. Then that one falls stinking to the ground, and the protagonist says they're too noisy, pointing his sword at them, saying that if they want to fight, they can come at me. And with that wave, he says, asking how he dares to cut off his younger brother's precious hands, saying they'll never forgive him, but they still run away while he says they paid the price for killing his adorable younger brother. However, one of them says that his brother isn't dead yet, and the two they stand there watching what seems like a comedy scene, and the three remaining ones rush towards the protagonist, saying they'll show them the connection between the brothers. But the protagonist simply raises his sword, and after all that discussion, the protagonist is cleaning that weird goo they use as blood from that spot on his sword. The girl says it's incredible, asking how he solves everything with just one thrust, and that comfort lies in his other abilities. But the protagonist says he only knows thrust, and the girl questions this joke, telling him that he only uses the light thrust, the medium thrust, and the heavy thrust, along with the serious thrust and some other thrust combos typical Saitama, right? I didn't want to say anything, but it sounds like it. She asks if he's serious, and says she just remembered someone who also only uses one technique like him, and that person uses the slash, not the thrust. He questions if he only uses the slash, since using only one technique. It's strange, but she asks why the previous attack missed, and he doesn't quite understand what she means. She asks why he blew up the ceiling above them, wondering if he slipped while adjusting his strength. He explains that while they were fighting those bandits, someone on the other side was using an invisibility ability, and it was bothering him, so he decided to scare them. She then questions who on earth scares someone by blowing up a roof, and he says everyone does it, as Yahello would have done it too. But then the girl starts saying they need to think of a cool name for his technique, and he doesn't quite understand. She suggests something like the Dark Destroying Piercer or Asura's Infinite Strike, but he says he doesn't like strange names. She suggests the Sky Destroying Desolate Attack or the Comet Emitted Earth, and he and Manola continued walking and kept quiet. And so he arrives in another corner, and she says she found it. There's the Twilight Workshop, saying that this is a workshop founded by a nightmare, and also the largest workshop in Gorgon. And then someone inside asks if they are customers who came to place an order, and the boy says he is sorry, but if you place an order today, it will take a while to be delivered. And here he is the naive craftsman of the Twilight Workshop. And the girl asks why, asking if the reservations are full, and he says that the workshop manager is absent now, and the only one there is the assistant manager, but has busy that day too, as he said he's testing the artisans or something, and in doing so he mentions that if they're looking for something, it might be better to buy something ready-made than to order an item. They look at the manager along with the other artisans, and he says that what they have is a sword made from the horn of a four-horned beast. It will be complete once they make a hole in the hill to insert a gem. Everyone says they want to do that, saying they also want to try refining a four-horned beast horn, but he says that this is a four-horned beast horn, asking if they really want to make a hole in that thing. Maikao just says he likes their energy, and if anyone manages to make a hole in that sword, no matter who it is, he'll give that person the position of assistant manager of the Twilight Workshop for the rest of the day. Everyone wonders why this thing is so hard when they start trying, and they all try to do something, but end up with broken tools and hammers, and they question how Heisei ended up refining that thing. And Maikao notices that hitting it like that won't even make a scratch. He even gave them the opportunity to use this huge workshop all day, and they can't even do that. Neven, standing at the door, is envious of him, wondering when he'll have the chance to touch the horn of a four-horned beast. But then the protagonist enters the place and tries to stop the boy, asking him to wait because he can't go in there now. Maikao looks at him, doubtful, and the protagonist asks to try to. Maikao is surprised, thinking he's a traveling craftsman, wondering if he wants to try because it's the horn of a four-horned beast. He says he doesn't know which workshop he's from, but wishes him good luck, telling him not to think it will be easy after his apprentices failed. The protagonist questions if the hole will be more or less there, asking if it's good, and he says it's not, that his apprentices are bad, saying that he is the one who is excellent, and the horn of a four-horned beast is an incredibly difficult material to handle, and it's natural that it would crumble, but the protagonist only uses one finger to touch that thing, which causes such a great impact that Maiko even shuts up in surprise. And so the protagonist actually drills a hole in that thing and starts swinging that sword with just his hand, saying that he has already succeeded, asking if he can be the assistant manager for the rest of the day, and everyone is surprised. But it ends up that while he is spinning it, the sword simply breaks completely, turning to dust in front of them, and so the protagonist is surprised that it broke, speaking with absurd naturalness, but then Maiko starts cursing him, not believing that he is acting so naturally, saying that he should break his head, asking if he knows how expensive that horn is, but the protagonist says he went easy on him, and Maiko questions how he went easy on him, and the protagonist says that breaking something completely is easy, but breaking it slightly is difficult. Either way, he's very sorry. And then Maiko asks if he thinks an apology is enough, saying that this was the horn of a four-horned beya, worth a fortune, asking what they will tell the primordial universe sect that commissioned this. And then the protagonist says that he will reciprocate with an even better horn, and he questions how to reciprocate, asking how you damn that bastard. How could he possibly reciprocate with something better than a horn of that quality? The protagonist pulls something out of his bag, saying he'll reciprocate with that, claiming it's from a creature with 5 horns, the best of all. Maiko is surprised because it's from a 5-horned beya, Garnek's horn. He asks if he can accept it, saying he doesn't have a 4-horned beya or anything like that. Maiko immediately changes his attitude, saying of course he can accept, even calling him a dear customer. The protagonist says it's a relief, then asks if he can use the workshop for a bit. Maiko tells them to close the doors, and everyone agrees. He asks the boy to go with him quickly, and Mino says things seem to have turned out well, so he should do whatever is necessary because she has to go somewhere else quickly. As the doors close, Maiko says that's the end. His workshop is the best in all of Gorgon, and since he's the assistant manager that day, he can use all the facilities and people there as much as he wants. The protagonist simply thanks him, but then Maiko asks how he obtained Garnek's horn, and he says he got it personally. Maiko questions if he's saying he hunted a 5-horned beast personally, and the protagonist says yes, saying he fought against that thing. But Maiko doesn't believe a guy could hunt a 5-horned beast alone, so the protagonist asks for his help. Maiko continues thinking that it's rare to find people like that in Gorgon, maybe even in all the chaos, but the protagonist tells him he needs a sheath, but he's never made one himself, only repaired them before. He questions him about the sheath, asking if he's planning to use Garnek's horn to create one, and he wonders how great the sword is. The protagonist shows him his blade, and he thinks it's a replica of an ice dragon's sword appears, described as rare, having been crafted by a nightmare, and also very beautiful. However, he finds Garnek's horn too much for that purpose, suggesting it would be better to craft a new sword from it. The sword ate and trembled, then trembled with hunger, escaping Michael's hand and reaching for the horn to devour it. Michael is surprised, believing it to be a spiritual weapon. He notes that, judging by the spiritual energy he senses, the soul of an elite race seems to be contained within the spirit, questioning how this could have happened. He then begins to notice the protagonist's sword evolving and seeing how its shape is changing. It must be a significant evolution. When complete, he will have to give the weapon a new name. The protagonist hesitates about this, and Michael confirms that this is indeed the case, as a spiritual weapon undergoes significant evolution and loses its original name. But the problem is that he's lost the materials now, but the protagonist says it's alright, since he has another horn. Michael questions how this is happening, but then he remembers, because as he said it's a 5-horned beast, it has 5 horns. So he asks the protagonist how he can help him, and he says that first he must show him how he refines things. Michael says that's fine, asking if there's any shape he wants, and he says he'll leave that choice in his hands, since he's the expert, and Michael is terrified because the responsibility is too much, and says he will have to demonstrate his skills as a master craftsman to ovulate. Meanwhile, in Gorgon Castle, in the commander's chamber, he is having tea, listening to his spy's report, and then he apologizes to the commander, saying that they know the thieves were massacred by him, but they missed their target. Yorin Shivia asks how they were defeated, and he says he's not sure either, because before he knew it, he was unconscious on the roof. Yorin is surprised that he wasn't caught, as he noticed through the invisibility abilities of a 3rd stage master level adapted being. He says this probably means he's at least a 5th stage adapted being, so he orders more men to find him, even if they need to search every corner of the castle. The man agrees, and when he leaves, the commander stays behind and begins to examine both his tea and his body. Then he begs his body to hold on just a little longer. In another corner of a tavern, a girl starts talking about a broadcast of Siren's top 10 of the week, and as the last clip, she talks about one they are very familiar with. The most famous clip in Little Brother, the most talked about clip, It's the solo completion of the 99th floor, and they are literally seeing everything the protagonist did fighting that ice dragon, and they wonder what happened to that guy. And they bet that he is desired by all the monarchs. But one of the group questions what they are talking about and if they didn't know, saying that the tower was suspended. And one of them questions why, and he says that he bets that some damn demon was caught cheating. And they say that he fled and abandoned his duty of cultivation, and bets that that clip is also fake. And one of them agrees after all. How could someone manage to complete a first-generation tower alone? However, they remember that most demons can only buy a tower with a loan, and breaking something like that is totally absurd, and saying that if they were in his place, she'd put it up for sale on Mercado Libre or something. And one of them asks the owner for another beer, until the door opens and Mino enters, and she walks into the place while everyone drools over her. She goes to the bar, sits down, and as soon as she stops, some crazy guy starts hitting on her. But she looks at him very seriously, telling him to go to hell, and he says it's okay, saying he shouldn't do something he'll regret. Then she starts wondering why she feels so awful, saying she wants enough to drink to kill herself. After drinking it all, she says she can't believe it, because that bastard has no scruples whatsoever, asking why he thinks he's like that, and questioning what he knows after all this. Then the bar owner, Claire, she says he's already talked too much, telling her to stop, saying she can't even get drunk, telling her to stop acting like one and being a jerk. So why is she chasing after him? And she can't explain it when she's near that guy, saying he just annoys her, and says he breaks everything, keeps holding that sword as if he doesn't care about the rules of that place. But she remembers the moment when the protagonist gave a small smile, thinking that he was still saying strange things. And she remembered when she told him that he didn't hesitate to use his strength, even when he didn't know what kind of place the chaos was. But he simply replied that they weren't human anyway, and she remembered how he looked at her when she said that they were different, and because of that, at that moment, she was feeling quite down, and she said that he made her feel like she was nothing, and said that Claire is her, and everyone who lives there has a difficult life. But then he appeared out of nowhere and started talking nonsense. She remembered when she asked him why he was looking for a nightmare, and he said that he wouldn't understand even if she told him. And Mino started complaining that he looked at her with that different, lesson-like face, and whenever she saw that, she got irritated. But Claire comforted the girl, saying that he was a very immature girl, telling her not to get involved anymore, asking her not to come near him again. But then she had that look on her face like she wanted to leave. But Claire said that if she stays with that guy, she might really die. So she questions why Claire is acting so frighteningly, asking why she would die. But then a golden ray enters the room, heading towards her, and it's a golden bird with a kind of helmet on its head, delivering a letter to her. The letter is from Carlton Xavier, the leader of Northport, to Mino of the Shadow Warriors. She sees Carlton surprised at sending her a letter and wonders why he sent it. She thinks she has a terrible feeling about it, but then someone arrives, asking if she's the witch from the massacre. She immediately draws her swords, saying that some people call her that. But before she can unsheath her sword, the guy grabs her arm, lifting her with his only arm. He says he has nothing against rough introductions, but he's busy, so they'll leave it for another time, saying there's something he needs her to do for him. Meanwhile, Michael is trying to cope with the horn of the five-horned beast, but his hammer breaks, and he falls on his backside, completely terrified, seeing the beast's soul telling him he can't go there. He questions how on earth he's supposed to refine such a monster, trembling with fear in the face of it, wondering how anyone in this world could handle it. But then the protagonist tells him to get out of there, asking if he's forgotten what they're fusing. Michael says that's not it, but the protagonist reminds him he said he would help. Then the monster attacks again, and the protagonist tells him to help properly, saying only he can kill this thing with a single attack. That's difficult. Michael tries to continue helping the protagonist, but time and time again, his tools break, and he says he can't do it anymore, because his tools can't even scratch that thing, and its level is too high for him to refine. But the protagonist says that this isn't a matter of level, so he closes Michael's eyes, who doesn't understand anything, and thus the protagonist speaks of the first stage of awakening, which is doubt, which is the power to break the true essence, the doubting of the world. And he says it's about surviving, opening Michael's eyes. Then he talks about the second stage of awakening, understanding, which is the power to understand the broken world. So, when he looks at that thing, he sees everything moving like slime, and he finds it strange. Then that slime starts to take shape, coming out of there, and he questions what's happening, seeing the true horror that monster was, and he's even more surprised. Then, the monster tries to attack him, and the protagonist tells it to get out of there, saying he said he would help him. Then he questions what it is, and asks if it's the true essence of a five-horned beast, wondering if he was using his pathetic skills so casually on such a being, saying it can't be, and he must be dreaming, looking at the door, thinking he has to wake up, and says it has to be a dream. But the protagonist tries to call him, but simply gives up. Michael leaves, screaming for help. but as soon as he leaves, he sees everyone dead, in the true form that the people there have, and he starts to tremble, and everyone outside, who are actually his assistants, asks if the assistant manager. He's just finished refining it, so he's completely bewildered, staring at the horizon and seeing that black hole up there, and that thing speaks to him, calling him a fool, saying he doesn't yet have the right to see this place, and he almost freaks out from having that vision. Then he questions how such a world exists and how he ended up in this world, and that vision he had for a moment was the vision the protagonist has at all times, being in the chaos, and he's inside, jumps on top of that thing again to be able to refine its horn. Then he calmly subdues the beast, putting it down, climbing on top of it, and preparing to hit again, and the monster even tries to fight back, but the protagonist takes a breath and gives the monster a single blow. Then Meercal is still freaking out there beside him, wondering why him, screaming there, and after a while, after getting his head straight, he says that there are acts in this world that are futile, no matter how many times they are done, and a human like that, trying to achieve the talent of nightmares, or surpass his natural limits. He assumes that it seems he's gotten too old to handle Garnick's horn, and he should have sought him out sooner, and in fact, he said he didn't come there for him, but for the workshop manager, who is a nightmare, and it's been a while since. The manager left, and he apologizes for the only one left being such a pathetic human as himself, questioning how a human who has never even built a tower can be an apprentice. But then the protagonist says that his race doesn't matter, and it's alright, as long as he can make a sheath, telling him to go ahead, but Meercal says no, saying he's tried enough. However, the protagonist says he can succeed if he tries 100 million times, and he cries, saying that he's young anyway, and he says he's sure that, to him, it seems like he's not trying, but he's already tried a lot, telling Haiwan that he tried while watching him, even though he's not sure if the boy will believe him, and the blacksmith in the past said, for the boy, who mastered all the skills related linked to the blacksmith, and now he can say with certainty that he can repair it with the weapons from the Nightmare Tower, with a 99% chance of certainty. But after reaching that success rate, he had a strange thought. Maybe he wasn't going towards the 99% chance, but in fact, he was running as fast as he could, away from the 1% chance of failure, and with that the user of whatever reached the maximum. Man, looking at this, it seems like a super cool thing, but my 5th grade screams, looking there, to letter users, author. Are you kidding me? The protagonist says he's someone who worked harder than anyone else, but he questions whether he understands the principle of the processing ability. Mikhail finds it strange that he's talking about this, since the nightmare processing ability is an original skill that has existed since the beginning, just like fire and water. He questions how a human can explain the origins of the world, and even if they can, what's the point of explaining one of these things? The protagonist says that what he's saying is that he's been using the ability without understanding what he's doing. Mikhail then thinks about this, discussing the principle, which he believes involves strengthening the hammer and chisel with spiritual power, and channeling that power to carve the horn. If it's such a simple principle, he questions why other artisans can't use processing. The protagonist says it's because they haven't yet learned the skill. But then Mikhail understands if the principle behind this ability is so simple, even if they haven't learned it yet, they should at least be able to do something similar. And the protagonist says that he doesn't know what this ability is, and yet he's using it, and everyone finds it strange. Mikhail says that he's talking as if there were a human who used the ability knowing its principle, and questions if he knows the principle behind the processing. The protagonist says no, but he found out about it before. Then Mikhail questions what he's talking about, and the protagonist takes his finger to that horn, and the horn dissolves from the tip of his finger, asking how he's using the processing. Then he tells everyone to look closely and say what they see, and they ask if it's the particles breaking apart. He says it won't be that easy, and it's because his golden work also solidified the walls of the world he holds as truth. Then he questions what the protagonist is talking about, and he says there's nothing wrong with the golden work, but asks if he doesn't think he should have understood by now, saying that if he doesn't, he manages to do this even after so much hard work. It's not him who is wrong, but the world itself. And then he finds it strange that the boy is saying the world itself is wrong, and then he remembers the nightmare talking to him, questioning if he doesn't know why he keeps making mistakes, saying that this was good for someone like him, saying that this was originally a method of nightmares and not of humans. So he questions what a human method is, but the nightmare questions how he should know and why he would want to know. After all, he is a nightmare, telling him to blame the race he was born into, and being human, he cannot surpass the level of an apprentice. But after hearing this, Mako kept thinking about this human limit, denying it and telling himself that if they was sure that the hard work could turn into something like nightmares. And Mako currently asks the protagonist what he should do, asking how he wants to fight against the world or something like that. And he says that this is a fair world, where you see results equivalent to how much effort you put in, asking what the problem is in getting used to this place. And the protagonist questions whether it's fair, because the world he deceives leads him to believe he can't do something when in fact he can. Where would it be fair? Saying that he may be old, but he can still fight, telling him to take a closer look asking him not to depend on the system, telling him to look with his own eyes. And with that he uses once again the power that the protagonist had given him. Then he sees inside the horn that black eye again, once again looks at it, and wonders if he has always lived seeing the world this way. A human without abilities or interference. A fair world where there are no disappointments, thinking that someone could only live like that. Unless they were the crazy guy, questioning how, or maybe he's just crazy. And he also hits that horn, using the same power Jawan used, and now he manages to do what he asked. And so he asks the protagonist if he's going to leave himself. He says that with the production it's finished, he needs to go, and besides, this guy seems to have liked it. He probably would have eaten it if he hadn't liked it. And so, the blacksmith asks if he has already chosen a name for the sword, and he even thinks about calling it Pig, but says he hasn't chosen yet. Then Michael says that if it's okay with him, he asks if he can give the sword a name, saying that he decided to base it on martial language, because it sounds cool, and uses the characters that mean a being of solitude. And the protagonist questions him about giving the name Lone Wolf, asking if it's like the one that protects the pack even though everyone fears him, and Michael says that's exactly it, saying that he doesn't think there's a better name than that for the sword, sending him away. Go safely. But before the protagonist actually leaves, Michael asks him to wait, asking the protagonist what he looks like in the world he sees. And the protagonist hesitates a little, saying that he is human, but Michael notices this, realizing and remembering the world the protagonist sees, noticing that he doesn't look back, and he wonders if there is anyone else who can understand this lonely world. Dude, the protagonist has been living the Walking Dead 24/7 ever since he arrived. It's a bunch of corpses walking around in front of him. Imagine how absurd that is. That's why he's acting so cold. I was freaking out. A bunch of crazy corpses, although he's super strong. So it's not that bad, but it's just corpses all the time. Everyone who talks to him, moves, and interacts with him is a bunch of dead people, and pretty decrepit ones at that, many falling apart. That girl we saw at the beginning, Mino, all cute and all. We thought she'd make a great couple with the protagonist, but he's seeing a corpse. It's like he's in a thriller music video 24/7. And after a while, the protagonist, he asks Mino why she keeps following him. She questions what's wrong, asking if he thinks she has some ulterior motive for doing this. Her questions if she's planning something new. Then she asks how he knew, saying she's thinking of a plan to kill him, speaking all sweetly like that. Then he questions what she'll do after killing him, and she says she'll live a good life with her spectral crystal, and he doesn't even remember. Seriously, she says she's serious, and he just dismisses her, and she says it's a very fake answer. But whatever, handing him something. He asks what it is, and she says it's her clothes, saying it's as an apology, and also because she feels he'll walk around as an indigo if she lets him, and he just understands that. And she says that anyway, he's never met a nightmare, questioning what he's going to do. And he says Michael taught him how to find them, and when he finds the nightmares, he'll ask them about the Mirage Tree and how to get to the abyss. And she questions why he's going to do that, and she asks if he's curious about her intentions, assuming that with some luck he manages to reach the abyss, saying that those who return from there are called the strong men of the abyss. But he says he won't return, and the girl is completely perplexed. When he says he's going somewhere else, because it's censored, she freaks out, questioning who he is, asking who the hell he is to do something like that, asking what qualifies him to do that, asking what kind of person he is to not think about how other people see him, to just do whatever he wants without thinking about others, and in a brutal way. More than anything, the fact that he doesn't think of the people there as human beings is what irritates her the most, because she and the people there are also human, and she may not be as strong or resilient as him, but she is still human. She says this almost crying to him, but the protagonist still looks at her with that same look of pity, remembering when she said that even if she dies, she will die in the present and will never return to the past. In the past, remembering Maikao as well, he begins to see the truth of what the girl is saying, realizing that someone is speaking telepathically to her, saying that it will be better for her if she doesn't keep thinking about such nonsense, saying that if she breaks her promise, the old woman's life will be confiscated, and she should lure him therewith. Her words questioning what she is doing, and he realizes that they want a hostage, noticing that they are the guys in the alley across the street, and wondering if he should get involved to save the hostage, thinking that he sees no reason to. After all, for him it doesn't matter how many people he saves. Reality will never change, because he only sees red in corpses, because it's suspicious. It shows him the true nature of this world, a number where numbers and data govern everything, and there are people who sold their souls in pursuit of greater gains, and he has to try to get rid of her and search for the nightmare. But then, the girl calls him, pulling him out of that little world, saying that in that sense she can't see him as human at all, saying that they're going to part ways there, asking how he could travel with someone with such an objective. He doesn't understand anything, and the girl says they won't see each other again, and he questions why he's seeing this woman. like a human again, and then the evil guy in the alley says that the witch extracted it from her, ordering the messenger falcon to be sent, since they brought all the nightmares there for nothing. But then the protagonist is surprised that there's a nightmare there, questioning what kind of nightmare it is with those guys, and thinks he'll have to change clothes. First, while Mino wonders how this happened, and she opens the bar door apologizing to her aunt, saying she thinks she arrived very late, but the guy who's threatening her says she knew this would happen, calling her a newbie, and the bar owner says she should have stopped her sooner, saying it seems like this time she's really going to die because of her, and they tell her to shut up. And just as one of them is on top of the woman and the elder of the Golden Sky sect, the oldest of the three Jania brothers notices that the witch of the massacre is going there alone, asking what happened to the agreement, and she says he's more stupid than he seems, wondering if he's ever seen a witch keep her promises. And she already pulls the swords, saying that the man cannot attend, especially since he is on his way to destroy that world, and she begins to attack them all, and Jania says that it seems she has gone mad, and they all rush at her, using the secret arts of shadows, and he says that they call her the Witch of Massacre in the hunting grounds, because she uses an ability that summons and brings beasts close to her, asking how it is, and they see if they can do the same there. Then the shadows begin to go after the girl, and she needs to dodge with everything to escape, but manages to kill them easily with her flying daggers. But as soon as she falls to the ground, Jania takes her sword and swings it towards the girl in an X shape, hitting her with everything, but she manages to defend herself and is only thrown backwards. Then Jania prepares to attack again, questioning her name being the Witch of Massacre, since apparently she is the one being massacred. Then she thinks that if only they were outside, everything would be different, and he says that they put up a barrier. That is proof against there's a lot of noise around that place, and no one from the outside can know what's happening inside. She's had enough trying to resist, so she should bring him there quickly, saying it's not too late yet. But she tells him the shadows will follow her, and he tells her to stop bluffing, because he already knows there's no branch of the shadows in Gorgon Castle. Then they grab the woman, almost tearing her neck off, and he says that when the Shadow Warriors find out what happened, he and that woman will already be obliterated. Then she prepares to use the 7 secret Grima's abilities of Acheron, Sub-Zero form, throwing her swords at them, but Jania manages to cut most of them with a single movement, saying it's a cute trick, saying she'll tear them to pieces with her own hands. But after using that attack, she doesn't have much strength left and almost faints there, saying she can't believe what she's thinking now. Remembering when the protagonist asked her if there was a way to go back to the past, would she go back? And she thinks she wants to go back to the past because if she had followed that man, she wonders if she would have seen the end of this world. But from outside, an attack comes towards Jania, over her shoulder. And he stops that attack with great difficulty, and everyone there doesn't understand anything. And then the protagonist enters the place, and she, in turn, says she hates this kind of development, asking what he's doing there and what he did about the destruction of this world, asking if he came to save her, but he only tells her that those clothes don't fit him, returning the package, and she questions if he came all the way there because the clothes didn't fit, questioning if he's serious, and one of them notices that he's the guy with the spectral crystal and says that this saves them the trouble of having to find it, and the protagonist comments on them having brought a nightmare there, asking if that's right, questioning where the nightmare is, or rather, he tells them to bring the nightmare to him. My friends, you better call a group to split up the walk between you, because it's going to be complicated for you two alone. And they all wonder if this guy is crazy, saying they heard he tried to go against the castle. And apparently, the rumors were true, and he's not quite right in the head. But Mino tells him to be careful, because they are stage 4 adapted, and anyone at stage 4 or higher is considered a high-level adapted, so it's not wise to underestimate them. The protagonist asks why, questioning if she thinks he'll lose, and she says no. And thinking about it, she thinks he really won't. At that point, Jane and the others call him shameless, going after the protagonist, saying they'll teach him a lesson. But the protagonist just uses a thrust against them, and Jane questions what's happening, pulling her neck away to avoid losing it. The protagonist is surprised that he dodged, and then he remembers someone saying he wasn't an adapted. Jane wonders if he's the strong man of the abyss, and the protagonist thinks that the only thing that managed to dodge that light attack so far was that 5-horn monster, which means that a 4th stage adapter, and that thing is more or less on the same level. But he thinks not, because that thing withstood the blow, and these guys must be weaker, but he thinks it doesn't matter. But then they hear someone in pain, and Mino starts calling Claire, and Jane says that if he tries to attack again, she won't be okay if he tries, but Claire tells him not to hesitate and just attack. And the other one hits the woman, telling her to shut up if she doesn't want to get beaten. Then Mino tells his aunt to wait, because they'll wear themselves out soon, and she asks the protagonist if he can do it. Then he questions why she's asking him that, because he went there to find a nightmare, and all he has to do is finish them off, whether they're hostages or enemies. But then the girl says that she's the human, asking him not to do it. He remembers everyone's smile, and also her lament, which is touched by something, and meanwhile, he looks at everyone there with his true vision, seeing a bunch of corpses. Claire, on the ground, asks why he's hesitating, ordering him to attack immediately. In his view, everyone is dead, but she starts to come back to life, while ordering him to attack now. He gets increasingly angry about this, attacking upwards and opening a huge hole in the middle of the building. Everyone outside wonders what's happening, and apparently Calvin already knows what it is. He orders everyone to hurry up, and from inside, their second-in-command says that this is terrible because the soundproof barrier has been broken. Jane realizes things are going to go wrong, so Kaltoni arrives and orders the area surrounded. Noticing Juan inside, questioning what's happening, the protagonist says he arrived just in time, explaining that these guys broke the laws he loves so much. He doesn't know the details, but they broke what appears to be Gorgon's Law, Article 276. Paragraph 4, and they seem to have planned to use this place as a starting point to destroy the world. However, the fool in the back says that he's the one who wants to destroy the world. Calton simply listens to them, stating that according to the law he just cited, paragraph 6, he will make an emergency arrest for illegally trespassing on private property within the castle and kidnapping a citizen. Nilsson sees the hand gesture Calton is making, and Jane orders everyone to retreat. Then Calton asks if they think they can escape him using the silver prison, which leads to chains that bind everyone. He also draws his axe, while Jane tells him not to make her laugh, attacking. He attacks again, and the two engage in a struggle of strength, while Calton stands still. And Jane trembles under the restraint Calton is creating around him until his sword begins to break. But he jumps to attack again. However, Calton uses the silver restraint once more, throwing those chains at him and bringing him to the ground, leaving him completely broken on the ground with that axe at his neck. He says he surrenders, and Calton says it was a wise choice to restrain him completely. However, Jane says he's right about him being innocent as he was now, grabbing a smoke bomb and throwing it behind them, the smoke bomb filling the entire area. After Jane escapes, he's surprised to think he would have to use the black cloud there, and one of them says that someone in the group seems to have inhaled some of the black cloud. The other says he's an idiot because they told him to always keep his mask ready, and they tell him to wait a bit because he can survive if he only inhaled a little. But another he arrives there, surprised that they used the dark cloud without the sect leader's permission, questioning if the massacre which is really that valuable. And that's the elder of the Golden Sky sect, the sex demon, Yuxulang. Wait a minute. A sex demon? No way, what? The male succubus. I don't remember the male succubus's name, but out of nowhere, a sex demon appeared. They didn't even go beyond lust to soften the blow. It's the demon of the two noobs. And he questions if they didn't say they would hand her over when they caught her, saying he doesn't like it when they're dead. And I think I know what he's trying to do with her. But I don't think it'll be good to say. I think you won't like it. But one of them says it wasn't because of the witch, and the silver prism was there. And they're surprised that that annoying guy with the chains is inside, and they confirm it. Then Ong says, it's good if he inhaled the dark cloud, saying it'll be a great scene to see. But then he notices something, talking to Jania, asking who that bastard is dreaming in there without a mask. And the protagonist already prepares his sword to launch an attack, and throws a thrust in their direction. And everyone is wondering who he is, but Jania says that someone her wants to find out, asking how he's doing after inhaling the black cloud, saying they've never heard of a green Paris without an antenna, and not even a green Paris should be able to do something like that. While Mino is very ill, the protagonist thinks that this must be the rest of their squad, thinking they're too annoying, and prepares to attack seriously this time. And the protagonist, then, raising his sword, says that he didn't want to have to do this, because having to depend on something like items is too much. But he plunges the sword into the ground, using Garnick's dignity, and everyone there is surprised, noticing that what was there is the roar of the five-horned beast. The Natru knocks out a large part of them there, and the protagonist goes after Jan, the demon of Jnujner, who asks what monster that is, ordering him to take care of it, running away. And Jan doesn't like that at all, looking at Jamyang and Janang, both lying on the ground. They wonder why things had to end this way. The protagonist says there's a way he can serve the other, telling him to reveal the nightmare they've been hiding. He questions him about it, saying that if he tells him, he has no reason to survive there, because when he finds out, he'll only wish he had died sooner. And the protagonist notes that he spoke about him. Then he says that he's going to die one way or another. Then he takes the crystal and eats it. And the protagonist realizes it's the spectral crystal. He remembers when he spoke with Mino, and everyone there seems to be taking some kind of narcotic. And she says that's a misunderstanding, but those aren't narcotics. It's something that needs to be done to lessen the spiritual corruption, because nobody wants to be a ghoul, and apparently he's turning into a ghoul. Then Jen, who ate it, starts having a bunch of black threads coming out of his body, and those threads take over his entire form, and everyone around him is terrified, because now he's like a completely black gorilla, with a bunch of disgusting threads coming out of his mouth, and he's become gigantic. The protagonist says that it's a ghoul, and he starts attacking everyone around him, wanting to kill no matter who it is, and now he's seeing the same way. The way the protagonist sees things, realizing that this is the truth of this world. and now seeing the same tree and the eye he saw before. He wonders what good is any dignity in a world like this, and he even questions why he was so afraid when he could be free like this. But then the eyes fall on him, he dies of fear, and he turns around looking for the protagonist, wondering if he went there. But when he throws his vines at the protagonist, he can't reach him and sees that the protagonist has always been that way, and he realizes that in a world like that, how can a human exist? And the protagonist questions what his problem is, because even when he uses suspicion, he can't see his true essence. But anyway, he points the sword at him, thinking it doesn't matter. Then he gets very angry, and the protagonist uses his thrust once more, and that thrust goes straight to the ghoul's head, tearing it from his body, and when Genia's head, he falls to the ground, he begins to remember his past, thinking that it is raining again. And he remembers the past while looking at the protagonist in front of him. And with all those dead bodies lying around, things start to calm down, and the protagonist picks up his sword again, wondering what exactly this guy is, and hoping that one of the others knows the nightmare's whereabouts, and he leaves, leaving all that destruction behind. And then, they say it's best not to approach Minna, and that she's still sick. One of them arrives, calling for his boss, and the one who's even more broken is Cawthon himself. He tells them to hurry because they have to warn the inner castle. However, Minna begs the protagonist to please kill her while she's still herself. The protagonist starts to think this person is human, and he couldn't use his comprehension on her because his suspicion wavered whenever he tried. He questions why the dead would collapse. While emotions aren't necessary on the path he's following, and he shouldn't hesitate. But then, Claire takes the protagonist's hand, saying it might not be too late. Then, one of the men who came to save everyone says she needs to go to the hospital right away. But she begs the protagonist to wait a little longer. And so, they actually take Minna with them. They question whether this woman can still survive, and they say there's no chance of. The invasion continues to progress in this way, and the protagonist observes from afar, while several emergency warnings appear, Gorgon Class 4, and smaller units appear inside the castle, and everyone runs out, wondering what is happening. But they ask the citizens to evacuate immediately, and one of them asks where they have to go. But they ask the wrong person, because that guard is already turning the corner, and he charges at him, killing everyone in front of him, and several die. While troops arrive to save the others, and the guy who arrives doesn't seem to be a nobody. While the protagonist observes from inside the tent, Claire questions if he is the person Minna mentioned, the one capable of ignoring all the rules of this place, saying that he plays the world according to his own point of view, while remaining firm in his humanity, saying that she knows people like him well, saying that she has seen them before. People who don't fit into life, they're because they are stupid, and they do it because they have no other choice. However, the protagonist says what she actually meant was that they lack courage, and she questions why they would need courage, asking about a higher ideal, or more just will, betting that he is the type of person who seeks those things, and he's probably right. She doesn't know what he's thinking because she lacks courage, but there is one thing she knows, and she knows for sure that he is dangerous, and he thinks he didn't want her to leave. So Claire says that he needs to leave, while he recalls Claire saying it's because people have already gained hope by seeing him. Claire says that if he stays there, people will be even more hopeful, and people like him make her not give up on this world. He remembers when Mino asked him, please, not to give up on this world. Then, someone asked how much medicine is left, and the doctor says that because they used a lot to stabilize the castle, there wasn't much left, and everyone was downcast. So, James ordered them to bring all the medicine they had in reserve, while the protagonist watched them doing it. The protagonist questions whether the remedy is actually the horn of a beast, noting that this is how it's used, and they realize that not even the three-horned beast is enough to purify him. They ask the boss to hold on a little longer, but the protagonist asks if there's any way to bring someone back when they're transformed into a ghoul. James replies that if he knew a way, why would he be doing this? The protagonist tells him to wake up quickly because he has something to ask him, grabbing Carlton and slapping him across the face. James questions how he used to do that to his boss, but he actually starts to come back to life and is surprised instead of making a mistake, saying he has a favor to ask him to kill him, as he's the only one capable of killing him. The protagonist asked if normally he shouldn't ask someone to save him in a situation like this. He mentions Gorgon's special law, Article 1, Paragraph 4, any man who starts corruption must play for Vasco da Gama. The protagonist thinks this is a very stupid loyalty, but he thinks that if he had some guys like him, he wouldn't have needed to be trapped in that damn tower for 40 years. The warnings continue, saying he's reached 94% spiritual corruption, and ghoulification will begin soon. Someone orders everyone to quickly move away, and here appears the extermination commander, Jahir, from the Great Ghoul Extermination Squad, adapted to the 5th stage. James, seeing him, becomes increasingly frightened. Jahir says that according to Article 1, Paragraph 4 of Gorgon's special law, he has to execute immediately, and silence is achieved from the northern outpost outpost and another individual, but then the protagonist stops his sword with his bare hand, preventing him from doing so. Jahir is startled, and the protagonist says he can't kill this guy, saying he still has something to ask him. Jahir is surprised that he blocked his sword with his bare hands, saying that they don't know who he is, but Calthan will soon turn into a ghoul, and the ghoulification of a 5th stage adapted being will cause a terrible disaster, and they are only trying to prevent it. However, the protagonist is unsure if he will turn into a ghoul, saying he thinks that something might stop the process. They notice it's Gnark's horn, suggesting they might have a chance with it. The protagonist simply grabs the horn and breaks it with his bare hands, horrified that he's holding such valuable material with such force. They then throw the medicine made from it into both Calthan and Mino's mouths, and say that fortunately, the measuring equipment indicates his value isn't increasing. But something goes wrong for Mino, and they say she's so weakened that the ghoulification isn't stopping, reaching 95%, and they say they can't stop it anymore, sending for Xianghe. Claire says she knows that old man is capable of performing the ghoul cut, and the protagonist listens attentively. She mentions hearing that the ghoul cut prevents corruption itself. Then one of them says the doctor is in the inner castle dealing with important matters, and they can't just call him for that. She questions why he said it's only for that, and the protagonist says they can't leave it like that, asking the protagonist to get out of the way, but he doesn't seem to want to, already wanting to draw his sword to resolve things through sheer ignorance. He says that he himself will kill that woman because she asked him to do it. Jerry remains silent, listening to the protagonist and accepting what he's saying. Then he uses suspicion, and Claire questions what he's doing, telling him to stop immediately. But then he sees that suspicion is leading him to a point right in the middle of her chest. So, very carefully, he begins to attack. But then something emerges from the ground and takes him to a completely white place. He wonders what's happening, and then an old man arrives, asking what happened to his girl, feeling sorry for the poor child and asking to help. But then he looks at the protagonist, questioning who he is and how he entered his world. Looking closer, he asks why such a noble soul is emitting such weak energy, as if he were a 5-year-old child. The protagonist thinks that suspicion isn't working and wonders if this old man is the source of the corruption, spiritually, thinking that by killing him, he might be able to save that woman. But then the old man simply returns his attack, stopping the protagonist's charge. He is surprised that he stopped his sword, but the old man also asks how he stopped his normal cut. He notices that besides stopping the normal cut, his entire sword is in tatters, and behind him are a lot of cracks. Gerald is surprised, noticing what the protagonist is doing, and the same old man, standing before him, questions how he dares to do this in his world, asking who the protagonist is. When he looks at his hand, he sees that his sword is completely broken, seeing that his precious sword, made from the horns of a 4-horned beast, ended up like that, cursing him because his beloved sword is totally broken. But the protagonist doesn't question whether he broke it himself. Then, the old man, who is Xianghiro, the doctor of despair, begins to think a little, understanding the whole situation, and Gerald speaks to him, asking about the Castellan, questioning what he's doing there. And he asks why he would call the Castellan when there's a beautiful lady about to die. And Gerald questions what that means. But Gerald speaks of something even more important, talking to the protagonist, questioning what he will do now because he ruined his cuckle, and the cuckle can only be performed with a sword made from the horns of a beast that has at least 4 horns. However, looking at the protagonist's sword, he wonders what kind of sword it is, and going towards Jeruan, questioning where he got such a beauty, returning that sharp blade, and also the sheath made from the horns of a 5-horned beast, asking how he got it. But the protagonist grabs the old man's hand, almost breaking it, asking if he can lend him his sword, and if he can save that woman. He says of course he can, asking if the protagonist is doubting him. Then Jeruan hands his sword to the man with absurdities, and Xianghe is surprised that he handed his own sword to a stranger without hesitation. Unless one has complete conviction in one's own abilities, no one would do that. But in truth, he thinks that doesn't matter now, noticing that the sword has a very strange energy, and is just like its owner. Then everyone watches him perform that cut, and the Lord imbues him with all his strength. Preparing the cut is made from the footstep to the tip of the blade, and he says it's time to show off those skills a little. The protagonist starts to wonder if it's the illusion from before, with that white tone taking over, but he thinks it's not that, and it's similar to how he sees things using suspicion. Then the doctor tells him to be patient, because this will end soon, and he goes on the attack. The protagonist thinks that's how that old man sees the world. But then the old man simply drops the sword on the ground and falls completely powerless. The protagonist calls out to him, and the old man says it's because he doesn't have enough spiritual energy, and if it weren't for that cursed castle, nothing would have to be like this. But the protagonist sees that everything is closing in, and the world is crumbling. Then a painting of Minna appears there, and the old man doesn't want his portrait to fall apart, saying he's sorry, saying it's very shameful, but the protagonist picks up the sword. Again, the old man says it's foolish, since he hasn't even managed to integrate into his world. And yet he's trying to imitate his cut, and he says he can't cut, but still, even if it's just a copy, he'll try. But the doctor tells him to stop, saying that the cut goal isn't something just anyone can do. But the protagonist says he's wrong, saying that what he's doing now isn't an act of bravery, but of responsibility. And he remembers when Claire said that people like him annoy her, and he tells everyone to shut up, because for the first time in his life, he picked up a sword to save someone, and he begins to enter the same world the old man lives in. Then he questions what the hell the boy is doing, and the protagonist questions what that girl looked like again, and tries to recreate her, painting her completely, remembering that she was a stubborn, playful girl, and despite being an assassin, she herself was vulnerable, and she is loyal, and he also feels that something is missing, but he thinks about it, making a mark under his eyes, saying that she believes in people, drawing a beautiful portrait of her on that canvas. And so he thanks the old man for remembering that she had a birthmark, and with that the girl really is dry, just laughing at him. Then her corruption level begins to fall, and the Ghoulification seems to have stopped, and Jerrier says he doesn't even believe it, while Claire runs to her asking if she's okay, but also questions why she's crying. And the doctor goes to the protagonist, saying that he seems less stupid now, despite his spiritual energy having gone from 5 to 10 years at most, asking anyway who the boy is, talking about the gold cut, or rather, goal thrust, questioning where he learned something like that. But then Jerrier talks to the doctor, asking if this man really used something similar to the gold cut, and he says he didn't want to admit it, but that was the case, saying that his gold cut isn't a skill, and because of that, no adapted being has managed to learn it. The doctor says that, like him, he is an awakened one, and awakened beings are ordinary people who manage to escape the rules of the system. They are a small minority of humans who manage to obtain miraculously powerful strength by rejecting adaptation, and they possess enough strength to completely change the power dynamics. In the chaos, and even across the entire vast earth, there are only a few people, known as the Awakened. Jerrier notes that because he is an Awakened like him, he was able to use the Ghoul cut, thinking that in this case, things might improve. However, the doctor tells him to calm down, saying that he still doesn't know his identity. Jerrier remembers that he had said that if there were another person capable of using his Ghoul cut, it would be possible to save the Castellan, and he tells the doctor that nothing is more important than the Castellan's life. Then, some people enter the place, saying they have permission in the inner castle, ordering them to get out of the way. Jerrier looks at those men in black, noticing that it is the captain of the Black Shadows, and that is the captain of the Black Shadows, the 5th stage adapted one. Jerrier questions why those wretches are there, since the Black Shadows squad should have nothing to do with the extermination of ghouls, not to mention that his squad has already taken care of all the ghouls. But then, they enter the place, kneeling in front of the protagonist, greeting the envoy of the Green Peers. Yes, they still believe that the protagonist, the one who killed everyone in that clan, is their envoy, and he questions whether the esteemed guest could go to the inner castle with him. But looking to the side, he asks why the extermination captain and the doctor are there, and they begin to question whether the protagonist is the envoy of the Green Peers, and later, already together with the Castellan. He thinks that they have finally met, speaking with Jerwan, saying that before they get to the main subject, he believes an introduction is necessary, saying that his name is Urine Shiver, and that he is the commander of Gorgon Castle, and he tells the protagonist that he will get straight to the point, asking if he is the envoy of the Green Peers, and the protagonist says no, and the Castellan reveals that he was already suspecting this, and the captain of the Black Shadows is shocked by this. And then the doctor says that he wants to ask him something, saying that the spectral crystal is famous by amplifying spiritual power, but they are usually the object that proves the identity of the members of the Green Peries clan. So if he is not a member of their clan, where did he get those crystals? Besides, he asks how he can use them without his spirit breaking, and the protagonist says that he just picked them up and he can only use them. Then he questions what happened to the original bearers of the crystals, and the protagonist says that they are dead. Jerrier questions this, asking who would harm members of one of the 5 noble clans of the Great Land, and the protagonist says that he himself killed them. Jerrier is shocked by this, and Urine tells him not to be so shocked, saying that Herwan must have had his reasons. They are all perplexed by this, and he says that they attacked him first and wanted to take a horn he had, and that is why he confronted them. Urine remembers that the Green Peries clan is a very greedy group when it comes to materials, so that's what happened. He talks to Herwan, asking if he can tell him more about what happened after he arrived in the chaos. After he tells everything, Urine gets straight to the point, noting that he coincidentally ended up getting caught up in something that brought him to the chaos. He coincidentally got his hands on the tiny crystals of the Green Peries clan and entered the castle. So he coincidentally got into this mess and met the doctor and tried to perform the Ghoul cut, which he had seen for the first time that day. And so he understands everything. Then the doctor asks if he believes, even with that guy, and Urine says yes. Then the doctor asks if something happened to his head because the castle lord disappeared. But then Yurin tells the doctor that to gain someone's trust, you must first trust that person, and Yurin asks if he can ask him a few more questions, if it's alright with him, and the protagonist agrees. Then Yurin asks if his body is currently alive, and the protagonist is shocked by that question, because he apparently didn't expect it, and he remembers that he didn't enter the main game, and in fact, he forcibly left the Tower of Nightmares. And having been in a state of spiritual body, it's very likely that the Mirage Tree was mistaken, sees him as an envoy, and sent him to chaos. And so he says that as for his body, it's probably still on Earth, and it's Ruan who questions how Yurin knew he wasn't dead, and he talks about the protagonist having said that, coincidentally, he ended up being caught in something that brought him to chaos, saying that there's no one in the chaos who would describe their own death like that. And he asks if the protagonist is being threatened by someone, asking if that's the reason for not wanting to reveal his identity. The protagonist says he neither agrees nor disagrees, and so he notices that he's saying both yes and no. Truth be told, he needs to apologize for some things, because for the last 4 days his subordinates have been watching him, and he says he knows this, because the guy on the roof must have been one of them. Yurin realizes he was aware, saying that his abilities exceeded his expectations so much that watching him alone was difficult, but that doesn't mean they didn't achieve anything. A large part of what the protagonist did was described in some reports, and he says that his danger level was classified as SS, and the target's power level was inestimable, and the estimated financial damage caused was approximately 300 million ruruni. He asks if he knows what people like that are called, and the doctor, he hurries, saying that he's a crazy psychopath. Then Jahir says he doesn't know if he's a hero or a villain, and the doctor continues saying that the protagonist is simply a madman. Then Yurin says that some will call him a hero, and others will call him a madman, saying that he's sure people will call him by various names, while he calls people like him protagonist. Look at that beautiful fourth wall break. Deadpool would be very proud. And he says that there's a common trait among the protagonists, not that they're famous, but the protagonist who is called by chance. And this is a webtoon. I have to tell you something, protagonist. I have to tell you something. It's a webtoon, and you're being narrated by a Brazilian from Chique Bahia. However, Yurin says that what it seems he's not famous at all, which means that something is deliberately withholding information about him, and this faction doesn't seem friendly towards him, because if it were the cheaters behind everything, he wouldn't have had any problems with a simple identity certificate. He says he thinks he's a protagonist who, coincidentally, fled to the chaos to try to escape some larger faction, and the protagonist thinks about this faction and continues, saying he's not sure, but maybe he's the Black Monarch, one of the 12 monarchs of the Great Land, and he wonders how strong these monarchs are. Then Yurin says that she won't ask about his identity. They won't charge him for the damage he caused, and the castle, Gorgon, will protect him. But the protagonist asks if Gorgon Castle is strong enough to face the 12 monarchs of the Great Land. Yurin asks if he's after the 12 monarchs, but the protagonist says he might be one of them. Yurin says he has good news. The monarchs can't directly interfere in what happens within the chaos. The protagonist then asks what he wants in return, and he speaks to Johan, saying he only needs to do them a favor, asking him to please save his Castellan. 2 hours later, it's said that the head of the northern checkpoint and his wife are recovering in the infirmary. One of the guards asks if he really wants him taken to the training grounds instead of the guest hall, and the doctor says they need to decide what's stronger, his cut or his thrust. The protagonist says that apparently that's what he wants, but the doctor speaks to him, saying that he must be among those who completed the Master's Tower, and the protagonist is already interested in what the old man is saying, asking if he knows anything, and he says that he knows what he needs to know. And so they are taken to the training field, and the old man says that if he manages to beat him, he will answer all the questions, although he is sure that this will be impossible. But after a few minutes, the protagonist simply slams the old man into the ground, and from inside the hole, he starts calling Druid to go again. But the protagonist says that he thinks the results have already been decided, and the training hall is like a house infested with mosquitoes. When you simply kill them by slapping the wall, my friend, if everything is the old man's fault. Look at this, you're in big trouble, man. And the old man starts saying that he hasn't used his final technique yet, because if the protagonist dared, he could die, and he was holding back because he was worried about him. But the protagonist was already furious because he had been saying the same thing repeatedly, and the old man kept calling him rude, asking how old he was. And the protagonist said he was probably 60 or something like that, and he started cursing the boy, saying he was 1,000 years old, and that he had only been stabbing for 60 years, saying there was no way he could defeat him, that he had been cutting for a whole 1,000 years. And the protagonist questioned if he had really been cutting for 1,000 years, and he said that's right, but the protagonist said that to him. It seemed like he had been doing it for, at most, about 10 years. However, when he said that, the old man left, very angry, jumping out, cursing the protagonist and preparing another attack. When will he see if he can still say that after taking that now? Summoning a huge dragon around his sword, the protagonist returns the the attack with another thrust, and when the two powers collide, the protagonist is surprised and ends up being pushed back, along with the doctor. The doctor says he didn't do too badly, and when the protagonist is surprised that he was sent so far back even after using a normal thrust. The doctor says that his technique is very useful, asking what it's called. He says it's the normal thrust, and the protagonist realizes he's completely crazy with that name, asking how that could be normal, and that he was thinking there must be a stronger technique. The protagonist says that there is, preparing to launch it, pointing that rifle at the old man, saying that he has a stronger one. Yes, then he questions, what is that? And in the doctor's eyes, he literally sees the only king of chaos, while the protagonist is almost about to kill him. I'm feeling the same emotion I had when Gum pulled out the Seisho Agu, along with Morel, that day. Not even the smoke of what Morel smoked all the time could get past his ass, son. Then the old man questions how he could forget the fear of facing him, and he notices that the boy is making him think of the only king, asking if he can really cut something like that. He thinks that he may not be on the same level as the only king, but an attack so powerful will bring Gorgon's castle, or whatever it is, down with him. And the protagonist says he's going, but the old man asks him to wait, saying he accepts defeat. Meanwhile, in the Great Land, in the 5th region, in the Metal region, someone is asking to hear again what they were doing. Speaking, asking what that wretched monarch did, they say that, according to their investigation, the Black Monarch is currently in contact with chaos, and the Metal Monarch, the inflexible metal, Hyoyu, questions why chaos, since all the monarchs of the Great Land must be part of the pact that prevents them from interfering in chaos matters. His subordinate says it's a bit complicated, asking him to take a look at the screen. He sees everything the protagonist has done recently, and says that this is the video that has been circulating with the name Solid Conclusion of the 99th floor, or whatever it is. He questions what's wrong with it, asking if the video isn't fake, and the subordinate says that the product in the video is something the Black Monarch of the 9th region would have hired. He asks where that product is now, and the subordinate says that after refusing to complete the tutorial, he broke the tower's ceiling, and they say he fled to the chaos. But the monarch questions how this is possible, since the cultivator should have been watching the 101st floor. The subordinate says that the protagonist killed the cultivator, and the monarch becomes interested in this, asking about this joke. The subordinate says he couldn't believe it either, but the Black Monarch seems convinced of it. Thus, the Iron Monarch wonders if the wretches of the 9th region have a connection to the chaos. The subordinate says that this is something they discovered recently, but the Black Monarch has been interfering with the chaos for a long time, and some of the 10 sects of chaos have been having regular communication with the Black Monarch. Thus, the Iron Monarch questions what he is planning to do and orders a message to be sent so that he can travel to the chaos. But then, the subordinate questions whether his master is planning to interfere in the chaos, and he says that he will only keep an eye on things to understand what is happening, asking to be given orders. 10 elite warriors, rank 1 gold, and Hai Yang, stating that he has adapted to the 5th stage, must serve. The subordinate agrees, saying thank God he isn't yelling at him today. The Iron Monarch continues contemplating the chaos, wondering how Hai Yang is doing, for he would have lived a long life if not for his fiery personality. Hopefully, he'll be staying out of trouble there, but in reality, the old man is nearly dead, clinging to the protagonist's sword, saying that he can't let him do that, asking how it is that he doesn't manages to respect his elders. And the protagonist tells him to get down from there, saying that he understands and is thinking that he really looks like a fly stuck there. When the old man falls, he asks how that's possible, asking how he manages to do something like that after only a few thrusts in 40 years. He says he thinks it's because he's given about 10 billion thrusts. The old man tells him to stop lying, because that would mean he had to go without food, sleep, and everything else to be able to thrust at least 8 times per second. But the protagonist breaks him, saying he can thrust up to 100 times in a second. He questions the old man about what makes him think that it's only possible to thrust with a sword, and that his whole body is thrusting even at that moment. The old man is surprised that the energy is foreign, the one he felt the first time. Listen, it's not real energy, nor something like a fighting spirit. It's his hostility and the intention to refine the world. So, when he brings his finger close to the protagonist, he feels the stab on his skin, thinking that's stabbing, and says he doesn't believe it, realizing that the protagonist has become the stab itself. Man, honestly, I don't think I know any protagonist as psychopathic in training as that one. The guy is immersed in it, crazy to kill someone, to break through the ghetto, all the time. Imagine, you walking around next to a psychopath like that. Are you crazy? An obsessive spirit appeared on your neck, and the old man notices that he's been stabbing the world uninterruptedly, even at that exact moment. And Jawan says he already told him that he gave 10 billion stabs. But anyway, before dueling, so much so that the old man will grant a wish to the winner, and he reads what Zhang Hui wrote, saying that he, the Doctor of Despair, promises on his honor and all the beauties of the world that he will uphold that contract. Then, the old man says he understands, asking if the protagonist is planning to use him as a slave. He says that's not necessary. His request is simple, to answer his questions honestly. That's all. all. The old man says that's fine, but calls him back a little. He asks the old man what the master's tower is, but Zhang Hui asks if he knows that nightmares create the tower. He says that the towers created by nightmares range from rank F to S, but there are nightmares that have no interest in ranks. He says that masters are those who have already managed to transform a rank S into an apprentice and become a master craftsman previously, but only because they were. Just because something is made by a master doesn't automatically mean it's a master's tower. Only special towers, created without any relation to cultivation, can be called a master's tower. The protagonist questions why these towers are created, and so Zhang Hui says that he doesn't know either, because there's no one who knows what the masters think. And he says that, from what they say, the masters are the ones searching for the truth of the world. But one thing is certain from time to time, there are awakened ones among those who complete the master's tower. At that point, the protagonist asks if he, too, is from a master's tower, and the old man says that he came from the fourth master's tower, Mervelu, a tower known in the world as Mobtic. And a giant whale appeared on the first floor of the tower and constantly goes after people. And the difficulty, it might seem hilarious now, but in his era was like a calamity. And so many martial masters of the martial realm died that way. And it was a miracle that he managed to complete the tower. When he reached level 100, along with his friends, he saw a demon in the form of an octopus. And he assumes that the protagonist is also from a master's tower, asking him whose tower he completed. The protagonist says it was Malak, and he thinks that was the name. The old man looks back, surprised, and says that to think there would be an awakened one who completed Malok's tower is too much. The protagonist asks if he knows him, and he says that of course he does, because they used to go on journeys together. The protagonist is even more surprised to hear what the old man is saying, and the protagonist confirms if he really is Malak, and he says it's a rather long story, saying that they will walk while he. So, they go to a festival, and the old man goes to Claire, saying he wants a kebab made with horned beast, asking if she's now running an open-air bar. She says it's because a certain guy destroyed her shop, and that guy is sitting right there. So, she serves them to beers. But then the old man teases her because she's opening her shop right after what happened earlier, saying she likes it too. But Claire, noticing, tells him to drink his beer and shut up. The protagonist, while looking at the food, also sees the people around him, saying that he must have sensed something was strange. The protagonist finds this strange, and Zhang Hui says that the people don't seem alive. And yet there's food, and a world where you can't feel hunger. He says that chaos was originally a blessed world, and it was the place where souls went. Tired of war, in the great land, they came to rest. And all beings rediscovered their lives after being freed from their existence. Swordsmen and archers lowered their weapons, and bards sang for peace instead of war. But then, a fight breaks out nearby, drawing their attention. And Zhang Hui questions what it looks like to him. The protagonist asks if they aren't just ordinary drunks, but then he notices something, realizing that what's their taste like water. The old man says that's exactly it. They aren't drunk, they're just pretending. Because you can't get drunk, feel hunger, or even grow old in chaos. But even in this paradise cycle place, humans are flawed, especially in that they keep searching for their real lives, where death existed, and begin to imitate the actions they had in their past lives. A life where you die if you don't eat, and then you remain intoxicated when he goes out to go out, a life in which you have a body and a beating heart. And he says that it was then that people began to adopt new actions, and people came together to reclaim their real lives. An expedition squad, dreaming of the impossible, and that was the Abyss Expedition Squad. The old man is very excited about this, but the protagonist not so much. Asks why they went straight to the abyss. He says it's to find the resurrection fruit, and he thinks he had a terrible reaction. Xiang, he says, is the fruit of the branch of the mirage tree that's at the bottom of the abyss. Then the protagonist questions this resurrection, asking if it's possible for a dead person to come back to life, and the old man says it's the resurrection fruit. The Abyss Expedition Squad was an alliance to find this fruit. And it was then he awoke that it was a time when he feared nothing, and was only 150 years old. The protagonist questioned whether he was saying that Malak was part of this expedition, and Xiang he confirmed that this was indeed the case, remembering what Malak was like, saying that he was the leader of the expedition squadron, and that the man was quite a character. He recalled when Malak found him on the battlefield, saying that he was an awakened being. Interesting, saying that he even had an incomplete awakening, in which he didn't abandon his emotions, saying that Xiang he was following a very strange path of awakening, and he bet that it was difficult. But the old man, at first, just told him to go to hell. But Malak said that he seemed irritated by what happened during the cultivation. But the old man simply attacked him without further ado, questioning why a nightmare, while they spent all day stuck in their workshops. But Malak says he has nothing to say in response, and it won't do any good, even if he apologizes on behalf of all nightmares. He says he's never heard of this before. He says this is the karma he needs to carry for the rest of his life. Xiang he says he was a nightmare, that he regretted creating a tower. He may not believe him, but the reason he entered the Mirage Tree and the reason he went to the Abyss is because of that tower. He says it's to end all cultivation, and that was his objective behind his participation in the expedition. The protagonist is surprised by this motivation. He says he ended up falling in the middle, so he only reached the initial parts of the Abyss. But it seems Malak managed to reach the top of the Mirage Tree, as fruits began to fall from the branches, and thanks to, so, everyone on the expedition managed to carry, if he managed to, a resurrection fruit. He questions why that old man is still there. Then, Clear says that he should tell the story correctly, saying that the expedition failed. And the old man knows this. But Shangrio questions how she could know, since she wasn't even there when it happened. She says that they succeeded up to the point of obtaining the fruit, and the old man says that's right. At the entrance that led back to the chaos, there were some men waiting for them, and those were the monarchs and lords of the great land, cowards who weren't brave enough to enter the abyss. But the Castellans of the 4 castles and the leaders of the 10 sects were no match for them. It was a massive difference in power, and the spiritual level was on another level, and that's how their fruits were stolen from them, and they continued to return to life endlessly upon dying with those fruits, and they remained like that for 900 years. And it reached the point where there was a place called the Palace of Resurrection for those damn people, and whenever the monarch, one of the 5 noble clans, dies, they are immediately resurrected. And it was decided from the beginning who would be able to live a worthy life. And the protagonist notices that this is why this place is so devoid of life, realizing that they know they will never be able to achieve real life or the fruit. And he asks about Malik, speaking to the old man, but he is asleep from being drunk. And he says it's no use, because that damned old man remains drunk, saying it could be the result of pretending for 1,000 years. And she says that anyway. From what she heard, nobody saw that nightmare after the expedition, and apparently he disappeared after leaving his final words behind, saying he failed, but at the same time didn't. James arrives to talk about it, thanking him for what he did earlier, saying that if it weren't for him, his boss would have died. The protagonist doesn't understand anything, and James asks if he's already forgotten him, and puts his cap back on, saying that from now on, he should always enter Gorgon from the north, saying that he knows his face and won't ask for a certificate, and of course, he should keep this a secret from his boss. Then he leaves, as if he'd done something great, but the protagonist just keeps thinking. Meanwhile, Hare arrives, calling for Johan and the doctor, and he's surprised to see the extermination captain there. He arrives looking very scared, saying they have a problem. And then, when they leave for the castle lord, as they approach the castle, he already feels that energy, understanding everything, realizing that this is the state the lord is in, and he notices that it's a ghoul, and this is at least dozens of times stronger than the spiritual pressure he felt from the ghouls before, and it seems to be coming from the castle's underground. Then he remembers Yaren talking to him, saying that they won't charge him for the damage he caused to the castle, and they will protect him. In turn, he only needs to do one thing, which is to save his lord. The protagonist realizes that the lord is undergoing ghoulification, and he says that's exactly it, and that he had a sudden attack that day. Normally, it only happens once a week, but this one happened earlier than expected. He doesn't want the protagonist to misunderstand. His lord is an incredible man, and before the ghoulification, he was a living legend, and he was one of the few people who participated in the Abyss expedition with the doctor, and the protagonist is quite surprised by this. But Jurir says that now that he's stopped to think about it, he can also perform the ghoul cut. Seeing the doctor's state, he asks if the protagonist doesn't think he could replace him, but the protagonist says no, saying he can barely imitate him and isn't even close to the old man's level, saying that if he were taught, he could. But then they get close, and Jurir notices that he trembled, not believing that things went wrong. But everything starts to turn into a mess there, and they notice that the castle lord has already completely transformed. But when Jurir looks ahead, he notices that those there are the leader of the defensive horn and the captain of the twisted horn, and they say that they haven't been around for quite some time. Then they speak to Jurir telepathically, that he must be the guy who performed the ghoul cut. But Jurir tells them to get out of the way, saying they can't waste a single second. They should know that, but one of them says he knows he can't do that because of his orders. But Jurir questions whose orders those are, until he realizes they are using Defying the Heavens. Then one of them questions what he's talking about, because the only heaven for them is the golden heaven, and so that guy with the axe and the guy with the spear. They rush towards Jurir, and he questions when that's when they arrived there, and he asks Hyroan to dodge them, throwing the boy back, and the two of them lunge at Jurir, but he stops their attack, remaining in place. The protagonist then realizes he managed to resist well, and Jurir is surprised, because thinking that the Golden Sky cult managed to infiltrate even the innermost parts of the castle is too much. Jurir says that those from the outer castle have certainly become bold, asking if they've forgotten who he is. but to say he shouldn't consider them the same as before. Jurier throws them back, telling them to think hard about it, because if they give up, the Castellan might still forgive them. But the two question which Castellan, asking if he's talking about that thing imprisoned in the basement, that thing that can't even control its powers, much less tell the difference between good and evil, saying that this isn't the heaven they used to serve, asking if the extermination captain, even in this situation, still wants to serve that thing. Jarius says he still believes he will return, and one of them says that's why it's impossible to talk to him. The one with the hammer almost lands a huge punch on his face, causing a massive explosion. The one with the hammer returns to the other side of the spear, saying that if he were a little smarter, they wouldn't have to fight. He asks if he isn't really the extermination captain, who was actually hit and thrown far away inside a house. He remembers that they are both adapted, only 4th stage adapted, and even they shouldn't be a match for a 5th stage adapted like him. He questions why he can't keep up with their speed or power level, noting that this isn't normal growth, but rather a kind of engorgement. He thinks something is wrong and dangerous, and tells the protagonist to run away. But the protagonist throws the old man at Jaria's face, saying that this is retribution for throwing him earlier. Jaria doesn't understand anything, and then the short guy. The protagonist says he couldn't hear his earlier answer, asking if he's the guy who can use the Ghoul cut, and the protagonist questions what he'll do if he is. The short guy replies that just by looking at him, he seems like a misfit, saying he can tell if it was just rumors or not, questioning if he performed the Ghoul cut using that sword, thinking that this guy is less than half his size, and bets that he can't even throw a proper punch. However, the protagonist questions if he's talking about punches, appearing right behind him and delivering a powerful punch to the short guy's face. The protagonist then calls for his defensive horn, but he doesn't have much time as the protagonist doesn't give him an opening, feinting with one hand and then using the other to hit him, saying that his defense is to open. Ultimately, he's defending with a broom. You could say it's a broom. I think that's not the best form of defense, like a thin strip of wood. There's a ton of space to hit him, and the protagonist takes advantage of that space to deliver a powerful punch right in the middle of his chin, making him take a step back. He even tries to attack again, but the protagonist easily gets back. But in the middle of the attack, he changes the direction of his spear and tries to hit the protagonist while he's running away. But the boy manages to get back again, but Magrella goes after him again. Then the protagonist says they can sense a stronger energy than before, wondering what kind of energy it is, questioning if it's a thirst for revenge. But the protagonist sees that it's not that, because half of his mask is broken, and he's seeing the face of that madman, while Magrella asks if he thinks someone like him can save the castle lord just by getting to the castle. And the protagonist begins to notice that he's scared, becoming surprised that he committed treason with so little courage, finding it hilarious. And he says that he can't do things like save people, because that's the job of that old man over there. But then he stops the spear with just his feet, leaving Magrella very surprised, and Jahir too. And the protagonist jumps on him, ready to deliver a thrust, explaining to him that the story changes when they talk about killing people, while the protagonist is outside dealing with those two, down in the underground where the castle is located. Yurin is with some other high-ranking officials. They say it hasn't even been a day since the Ghoul cut was performed, and they question how he's already like this. Yurin says he saw it with his own eyes, and the doctor passed by there in such a state of flurry of activity until the energy calmed down. So he questions why he's like this again, asking why this had to happen. Then a glimmer of hope appears that it might be curable, suggesting they could have cured him if the Castello Stadium had lasted just one more month. But then the doctor says that's no longer possible, stating that the protagonist's Ghoul cutting technique is simply an imitation. Unlike Mino's case, the corruption at Castello is serious, and any normal person would have scored a goal a long time ago. He only lasted this long because he has a very strong will. But in a month, his Ghoul cutting might be something worth betting on. He says he's never tried it before, but it might be possible with 2 people. And of all the possible people, if it's him, it'll work. And Yuri doesn't like this at all, because one of them must know about Juo and Wan, and he already knew there was a traitor among them. Then he said that people who can manipulate spiritual corruption have emerged, and he's surprised that this is the case, even though they aren't part of the Paris Verdi clan, saying exactly that, and that's why he wants to see for himself. And Yuri is quite surprised by this, reminding him that matters related to spiritual corruption are very dangerous. Questioning why he didn't send a captain or a minister, he says he has very little faith in him, questioning if he's forgotten who he is, saying he survived a hell of a war, and he may have lost the war for the fruit, but he will continue to meddle in matters related to the lives of the people of Gorgon. But when Castello returned, he couldn't believe he was in that state, because he went on an inspection and came back spiritually corrupted, and the people who saw this happen are in that room. He wonders if it was Marin, and he speaks to all the guards, saying that this is a serious situation, but Yuri says it's dangerous, saying they'll only go in when the doctor arrives. But Marin says that if they delay this any longer, it will be the end of Gorgon. However, Yuri says that they can't perform the Ghoul cut if the doctor isn't there, asking if he's planning to kill Castello. Marin says that he knows they can't defeat him, even if they all advance together. Then Yuri asks what he wants to do, and he says he's going to perform the Ghoul seal. Yuri is quite surprised, saying no, that this is the last option, but he says it will be too late if they wait any longer, and they need to at least preserve the Castellan's spiritual energy through the Ghoul seal. However, Yuri says they don't have a spectral crystal to seal Ghoul. But then, Marin calls the commander, saying that everyone already knows and he doesn't need to hide it anymore, saying that he arrived, and that the guy is carrying something in a box, and that's the captain of the Black Shadows. Yuri doesn't believe it, because the captain of the Black Shadows is a member of the commander's faction, and also a traitor, and that box is the one holding the spectral crystal that Jiohoon had with him. Marin says that this involves Gorgon's future, asking why he was hiding such an important item, because he, more than anyone, should know what will happen if the Castellan becomes a real Ghoul, actually incriminating him, saying that he must want to transform the Castellan into a mega Ghoul, asking if he wasn't already. Marin says he saw with his own eyes how much of a threat just a medium Ghoul could cause to Gorgon, and mega Ghouls are a calamity that command countless ghouls and bring ruin wherever they go. Those who pass by are asked if he really wants this to happen, so Yuri is left with no choice, seeing that Castelao's fury and the doctor's absence make his opinion valid. However, Castelao says that this isn't something anyone can do just by possessing a spectral crystal, and that he sealed it with a secret technique of the Paris Verde clan. Main questions how he plans to bring one of their clan members there now, but Yuri tells him not to worry. Castelao then says he's already called people who have learned this technique, but Yuri sees that these people aren't from the Paris Verde clan. Mayan says no, but that they are capable of performing the seal. However, Yuri thinks things are very wrong there, and if the seal is performed like that, Castelao's spiritual energy will be placed inside the crystal, since energy isn't hereditary in chaos. If someone possesses the spectral crystal with Castelao's spiritual energy inside, that person could inherit Castelao's spiritual energy and become the master of Gorgon, and if Gorgon falls into the wrong hands, everything will fall apart, and he notices this, realizing that there is someone else who can hold the spectral crystal besides a green Paris, and someone like Drua who could be an irregular. And seeing this, he immediately remembers when Castelao told him that people who can manipulate spiritual corruption would emerge, and he is shocked, connecting all the dots and realizing that from Castelao's spiritual corruption, which happened half a year ago, to his fury today, all of this was part of the Outer Commander's plans. And he tells the men to stop the Outer Commander, but none of them want to do it, because they're already completely bought off, and so Yurin falls to the ground desolate, because they're all involved in this, and so he thinks there's nothing he can do, apologizing to the Castellan. But while they launch that technique, Yurin thinks that because of his complacency, he was unable to protect Gorgon while crying. He says he's very sorry, but then the entire ceiling starts crumbling into pieces of stone, falling down below, and a hole opens in the middle of the ceiling. They question what on earth happened, and when Yurin looks up, they all notice that the protagonist is arriving there, along with Jahir. Another question arises: who on earth is the protagonist and how dare he go there? Jahir tells him to stop pretending by throwing a man down there, saying that his blasphemy has already been revealed to the whole world, and these guys have already confessed everything. Marin gets angry, while the shattered staff on the ground apologizes, but ends up exploding in front of everyone. Jahir asks what the Outer Commander is doing, and he says that now that their betrayal has been revealed, it seems like he's ejecting himself to another world. He asks if he should really be blaming himself for his inability to prevent a criminal self-ejection to another world. Then Jahir asks what the hell this is, ordering them to prepare yourselves, for that is blasphemy, saying that if the Gorgon seal continues to progress, things will go exactly as the Outer Commander planned. But everyone in that room points their swords at his neck, and he questions what they are all doing. They apologize to the extermination captain, ordering him not to defy the will of the Outer Commander, or rather, the Golden Sky Sect, telling him he needs to stand still until the seal on the Castellan is complete. He shouts to everyone, calling them traitors, and the protagonist tells Johan that he made a false promise, saying that Gorgon cannot guarantee his safety. Johan questions what he's talking about, and the protagonist says they will change the terms of their promise. Johan asks what he's talking about, and the protagonist says he will save the Castellan and kill those traitors for him. In exchange, he must give him that old man, and he will bring back the exploration squadron, Abyss, and by doing so, they can help him. And all three are surprised by what the boy is proposing. And Marin says that he's great at talking nonsense, saying that he's heard rumors about the man who managed to kill Regiania, who turned into a ghoul with a single stab, and he thought it was a lie, but apparently it was true. And in that case, they will need to give everything they have to, and they all charge forward, while the protagonist wields his sword while they are still in the air. He unleashes a barrage of thrust in all directions, killing each one of them, and that captain loses an arm. Then they look to the side. They see that things have gone wrong, and the protagonist continues hitting everything that moves, and he says that they continue coming towards him. But then, even broken, they still try to hit the protagonist, and he sees that there's no way out. Using a normal frontal thrust, arrest, taking down a large part of them. Marin even tries to stop the attack, but thinks it won't work, and it's impossible to block. So he tries to deflect it by throwing it to another corner, and the Castellan is almost hit. Urim, looking back, is afraid, realizing that if he had tried to block, he would have died. And Urim is terrified by that incredible destructive power. They speak with the Elder Chief, asking what they should do, as continuing with the plan is still complicated. And if they can't maintain the Ghoul seal, they won't have it. The only option left is to resort to Plan B, which involves immediately releasing the Dark Cloud. And even here, Senkel and all life on Gorgon are gone. But the protagonist is listening to everything they're saying, and he speaks to Marin, whom he already knows is the outer commander of Gorgon Castle, as well as the Elder Chief of the Golden Sect. He says he doesn't know what Marin is trying to do, nor why he's infecting the spirits. But one thing he does know, he likes people like him. The protagonist is preparing for an absurd attack, and Marin sees it coming. He says it doesn't matter what it is, ordering them to get rid of it. Meanwhile, the protagonist says he's truly grateful for people like him existing, because he doesn't need to feel guilty for eradicating this world. Unleashing the strongest blast he's ever given to that planet. The blast rises to the sky, turning into fireworks, and they are all amazed by it. And Urim, he can't even move. And this is while Jahir tells him he needs to pull himself together. But he just stands there staring at that overwhelming hope. And he remembers the Castellan's words to Urim, that the people there need hope, a hope that will not waver before anything, an overwhelming hope. And he says that feeling the overwhelming hope the Castellan spoke of, coming from a man who speaks of the destruction of that world, is something he didn't expect. And after that attack, Marin is split into. Actually, he was split into more pieces, but it's impossible to count. And he says that the boy is truly monstrous, but it's too late, because Gorgon, the Castellan, is already gone. But the protagonist goes there to finish what he started, plunging his sword into his face. And then Jahir calls the protagonist, and he asks if the old man is still sleeping, and he says that no matter how much they shake him, he doesn't wake up. But the protagonist throws the old man against the wall with everything, and they question what he's doing. And the old man thinks it's that familiar feeling the terrible pain in his pelvis. And Drua says that he should have woken up on his own, calling him right away, because the Castellan is on his last legs. But then he starts to move, because the target's spiritual corruption rate has exceeded 99%, and the Ghoulification is imminent, and the system starts to calculate the target's danger level, but reaches a consensus that it's impossible to calculate, and the system's verdict is that it's a mega Ghoul. And they initiate an automatic Gorgon alarm system, and everyone runs out, trying to evacuate, and the guard says that everyone must be evacuated, without exception, and they need to avoid further incidents. And at that moment, James questions what the hell is going on, and what's happening in the castle. Then the old man tells the extermination captain that he and the internal commander need to be evacuated, and tells the protagonist to give him a hand there. He says his thrust is still too sharp to save people, but the protagonist questions when he changed swords, and the old man gets angry with him because he was the one who broke the other one. Then he says enough of this nonsense, entering the world of paintings again to save the castle lord. But when he starts creating that work of art involving the castle lord to bring him back, as it was before, he begins to revisit the memories, and tells the protagonist that the cut Ghoul awakens forgotten memories, like the one where he mentions that he also tried during the incident with Mino, and once he's full of memories, the most urgent problem will have been solved. But then someone disagrees with him, startling the old man, and he immediately remembers something he's seen before, asking about the Castellan in that voice. Then that voice looks at him, and those eyes make him certain that it's not the Castellan. Then the Castellan actually opens his eyes, and everyone finds it absurd. The protagonist calls the old man, who says something is wrong, saying that this is something else, and it's not the Castellan. Then he simply tears off all those chains, stands up, and becomes enormous in front of them. With that, he opens those hideous eyes, looking at everyone and emanating that dark aura. And with that, he completes his transformation, floating in the air. And so the old man is certain that it's not the Castellan. And that's something he had already said before. And when the thing steps on the ground, they feel the pressure, and that thing says it's surprising, because to think that it would arrive there, through that body, is too much. And that thing is pure hatred, and says that in the end, this man also became a Ghoul, and he's seeing a familiar face there. And he starts smiling at the doctor, calling him an incomplete awakened one, asking why he's still in the chaos, asking if 900 years ago, he didn't get what he wanted in the abyss. And the old man says that he is the owner of the Ghoul Palace, located in the center of the chaos, and the only being capable of opening a portal to the abyss, the only king, the catastrophe. And the protagonist thinks that even if he uses suspicion, he doesn't know what this thing is, and starts to get unhappy with the situation. Then the only king likes the situation, amused by their fear, and the protagonist realizes that it looks like a Ghoul, but it isn't, and questions what the hell it is, and that the thing just waves its hand, asking why he didn't leave the chaos, spreading its influence everywhere, and undoing the old man's world. He doesn't even consider that the old man didn't leave to save that world. But the doctor is surprised that with just a movement of his hand, he completely erased the world he himself built. And so the only king continues smiling in that situation, noticing that the protagonist is an interesting human, saying that even though he has fully awakened, he still has a human heart. The old man thinks that the power of the only king, descending from the Ghoul, must have taken possession of the Castellan's body using this. So what they're seeing now is a meager shadow of the only king, but he is already trembling all over, thinking that if a presence that is just a shadow is so overwhelming, imagine the real thing. He sees the monster hundreds of times larger than it actually is because of that pressure. But the protagonist calls the old man, asking if he failed, and now he says he's simply going to kill that thing. And so the king questions him about killing it, wondering if he's talking about killing the great, one and only king. And then he starts stretching his neck, and his head detaches from the body, turning into an L shape and laughing at the protagonist, saying he's a funny guy, my friend. This is terrifying. And I'm not going to the bathroom or looking in the mirror at dawn. Son, are you crazy? Turn on the light. Keep the light on. The doctor tells the protagonist that he can't, because this isn't something that can be killed or stopped. And not even Malik could do anything against it, and this might just be a shadow, but it's still very strong. However, the protagonist tells him not to be afraid, because he can win. And then the old man questions how he can remain so calm in the face of such an absurdly powerful being. But then the king starts laughing loudly, completely ignoring what the protagonist is saying. Then he simply returns his neck to its place and looks at the boy. But this time he acts like Orochimaru, spitting his sword from his mouth, saying that he can come if he wants, taking it with both hands and drawing that great sword, calling him a foolish awakened being with a human heart, preparing to really go head to head with the protagonist, and the guy is itching to fight him. Will we see the use of a serious thrust? Will we a thrust? Wow, man, things are going to get good, huh? And then the old man recognizes that weapon, a sword of the void, a terrifying weapon that instantly transformed half the expedition squad into creatures at the entrance to the abyss. He could see that weapon once more, but he certainly didn't want to. Then the king of the abyss lunges at the protagonist, but he manages to dodge the attack, narrowly avoiding being hit. He says he's seen that expression before, and that he's heading for the abyss. The old man is desperate, as he didn't know this, and he says he knew that Brat was strange, but he never imagined he would have these intentions. The king is surprised that there are still people who want to reach the end of that world. However, that's not enough. Then he grabs the protagonist's head, saying that he's still weaker than that nightmare from 900 years ago. The protagonist barely manages to break free, but he jumps, dodging the Castellan's sword at the last moment, getting out of the way, and manages to stab the thing in the arm, tearing it off. And so he thinks it was good, because he ripped off one of his arms. And now they're going slowly. But then that arm he ripped off comes back at the protagonist in the same way. And he doesn't understand anything, only having a chance to dodge those attacks by a hair's breadth, and almost takes one to the chin, and gives another thrust to the middle of that goalkeeper's body. But he continues attacking as if nothing had happened, and so he manages to grab part of the protagonist's cloak. And he says that corruption is a disease of time, and so the protagonist is wounded in the arm now. And the king said that a single glance at the sword of the void would cause hundreds of years, or rather, thousands of years to pass, and the soul cannot withstand that time, aging and becoming corrupted, and thus it will become a ghoul. But the protagonist says that this will not work, because he himself gives a thrust in that piece of meat, tearing it completely off, saying that he only needs to rip. His king is surprised that he ripped a part of the aged soul from his body, a man with a sound mind, saying that he has an astonishing willpower. However, he says that this is the end. Then he pulls more swords from his body, and the protagonist is horrified by the sheer number of swords around. The king prepares to control these swords, manipulating them telepathically, to throw them at the protagonist. What a beautiful scene. This world is very well designed. And then he actually throws those great swords at the protagonist, and the old man ducks down, knowing there's not much he can do. Then the king says that now that he's stopped to analyze, that sword in his sheath is a replica of the Tower of Nightmares, and says it's an excellent toy, created for a nightmare. The protagonist tries everything to avoid being affected by those weapons, and the old man becomes worried about him. But the protagonist only says that he already knows what to expect. He was planting his sword in the ground, preparing for the king's next attack. And the king did indeed come, but the protagonist stopped his sword while he was still in the air, and the old man ended up being thrown backward, and just as the king whispered in front of him, saying that if he continued resisting like that, his soul would not last. And the protagonist thought that he was right, he couldn't win like that, saying that he couldn't, and to a weak point of his, no matter how many times he used suspicion, the strange particles made it difficult to concentrate in that place. But the protagonist remembered when the doctor told him that his unique world is called the world, marked in white, a world created by his ideal of keeping alive the memories of all those who disappeared, and each awakened one has their own world. And the form of this world is determined by the key word they obtained upon awakening with an emotion or a desire. The more powerful the awakened one, the more existences they can take to their own unique world. And the protagonist then thought that being so, he was at the moment of turning the tables, throwing the king's sword back. He himself launches into that world, fully activating his world, and it's the world of oblivion. And in that, the entire world truly changes, and that tree and the eye appear there, and the king begins to see it. Then the doctor thinks that this is hell, and it is indeed hell, realizing that he has been living in a world like this all this time. A hellish scenario where only hatred and anger against the world exist. And then the king asks if this is his ideal, finding it interesting. But the protagonist plunges the sword right into the middle of his mouth, without giving him a chance to even resist, and says that at least he's not seeing those irritating particles anymore. And with that, several of the king's teeth fall out of his mouth, and he begins to laugh even while receiving that attack. Then several vines come out of his body, heading towards the protagonist, and he gets up again, looking the boy face to face with that broken mouth, saying that he continues to challenge him like a fool, without knowing how to finish him off. Then he raises his hand, throwing the protagonist down this time, and plunging the boy into the ground. And the protagonist feels a terrible pain, while the king keeps plunging him deeper and deeper into the ground, opening a hole there. And at that point, the doctor is scared shitless. While the water flows out of that hole, the king begins to stomp on the protagonist's chest, saying that he who hadn't let go of his hatred had been an interesting existence, one he hadn't seen in a long time. He draws his sword once more, ready to plunge it into the protagonist and kill him, saying it was fun, which is a shame. But before he could kill the protagonist, he opens his eyes in the most protagonist da Silvestre style possible. But then, before he could do anything, the protagonist simply launches an attack from below, hitting him in the middle. The king is quite surprised, and the protagonist says it was fun, but he's only just getting started. The creature returns for a second round, and the king says this is hilarious, as it can't even inflict a single wound. It starts to reform, even after falling, and reassembles itself, becoming even uglier. The protagonist questions what the hell this is now, as it looks like a boss from Outer Ring. Then the monster tries to attack him again, but the protagonist gets out of the way, but the monster throws its hand. The king lunges at the protagonist, who defends himself, but the king strikes him with the racket, throwing the high one, which is embedded in a wall. The boy starts bleeding, and the king lunges at him again. The protagonist dodges and appears behind him, preparing another thrust, but the monster turns to face the protagonist's attack, looking at him just in time and deflecting the thrust. The king says that for the last hundreds of thousands of years, he has witnessed the beings that established the world, all of whom climb this tree carrying different questions. He looks deeply into the protagonist's eyes, asking what kind of answers he seeks up there, carrying a world like this, and what his question is. He attacks the boy again, but the protagonist manages to withstand the king's attack, who says he understands, explaining that this world itself is his question. Then he asks what this world is to him: destruction, annihilation, or eradication. And he begins, noting that for the protagonist this world is an apocalypse, and that's the only name that fits that world, saying it's a very arrogant world, since a mere human is questioning the value of the very existence of the Mirage Tree. And he asks if the boy is questioning that. Following the patterns of his world, he attacks again, and the protagonist starts to run away, but also asks him what the hell he's talking about. And the king doesn't understand anything, but begins to realize that it wasn't a question, and so the protagonist resumes his pose to launch an even greater attack. And he says that in this situation, he has already experienced it somewhere before, fighting against that demon, and he remembers it, realizing that this guy in front of him is the shadow that descended on the castle, which means that he can still do something, preparing a thrust. And the king becomes alert to that. But the protagonist throws his attack too quickly for him to do anything, and after that, the king is almost falling apart, calling the protagonist an arrogant man, asking if he doesn't understand that he's not capable of killing him. But with each attack from the protagonist, he gets uglier and uglier, saying that it's too much insolence, and that it's getting boring. He's going to finish off the protagonist once and for all, and he charges at the boy, literally wanting to devour Johua. But then he makes a move, preparing the next. As he jumps, he begins to see those same lines, showing the weak point, and he says he knew it, that it was connected to his body. With that, he attacks right where the connection is, and the king thinks it's impossible as it's a fictional ability. Then he plunges his sword in as hard as he can, and the king calls him, calling him an existence, living through the apocalypse, saying he'll be waiting for him at the entrance to the abyss. With that, he finally emerges, and the protagonist is all broken, missing to huge chunks of his arms. He endured the ordeal just because of a shadow of what the king is. He starts to think that he needs to get stronger, that he needs more than just thrust. He specifically remembers the heavy thrust, a good ability to face an army. But against a powerful individual, the area of effect is too wide to be effective. This time, he only managed to use it as a distraction to buy time, and you will need a new, specialized skill to face a single individual. And after that, the doctor is lying on the ground, and Jerry arrives along with Yaren. But then, the Castellan calls the protagonist, and he sees that it is is him. Noticing that the Castellan is still alive, he asks the protagonist if he can come over, and tells the protagonist that he has become a ghoul, but has still been watching over him because he is very grateful that he has faced the only king. Then he grabs the protagonist's arm, but the protagonist doesn't like it at all. However, the Castellan says that perhaps now is the time for Gorgon to change, asking him to accept it, and he begins to place his power on the protagonist's arm. Then a branch appears there, and he says that it gives him a familiar aura, reminding him of Yeren, Jerry, the old man, and also of Mayan, and all the others who live in the city, saying that he can feel comforting memories, asking him, please, not to forget. From his human heart, after a while, Jaime arrives, asking if everyone is alright, that the old man can only complain about his back, but when they look to the side, they see the protagonist arriving, and they also notice that symbol on his arm, a symbol that goes from his shoulder to his wrist, and with that, they all kneel before the protagonist, and Yeren is surprised, inking the Castellan, finally understanding, thinking that if this is his wish, so be it, saying that he and Yeren Tibia leave the new Castellan of Gorgon, and they all revere the protagonist, and so, 2 days later, Yeren goes to the protagonist, who doesn't want to do anything, and he says that he is not the Castellan, and already said that he won't keep doing this. But Yeren says that he seems to have forgotten the details of his promise, saying that he will remind him, and the protagonist's promise was to save the Castellan and kill the traitors. And Yeren's promise, the goal was to help organize the expedition, squad to the abyss, and the protagonist asks if he's in charge because the Castellan is dead. He says it's something like that, and the protagonist explains that the Castellan is dead, but since he's the new Castellan who's alive, there are no problems. Yeren then says that's certainly the case, and that he will have to keep his promise in the future. Since Mr. Jirawan is now the Castellan, and the protagonist doesn't like that at all, questioning how things came to be this way, saying he has no time to waste in that castle, and he needs to move on, and needs to go to the abyss. He asks Yeren if he can pass the position of Castellan to someone else, but he immediately denies it, saying it's impossible since Gorgon won't recognize him. The protagonist is surprised and asks if by Gorgon he's referring to that symbol, noting that he was chosen by that thing. Yeren explains that's why the position isn't something that can be passed on to someone else at will, because the only time Gorgon's Castellan changes is when the previous holder of the title dies. Besides, those documents need to be resolved today, and since he just became the Castellan, he also included records and other information there. The protagonist picks them up to read, noticing a rather peculiar law. The first one states that insulting the Castellan in the street is a public lynching, the second time will result in the abscission of the soul, and the third time will result in the complete liquidation of the soul. And the protagonist begins to realize that this is why everyone is saying good things about the Castellan. Yeren tells him to feel free to use the objects on the table, and he goes to organize the books, asking him to call if he needs anything. However, the protagonist pulls open a drawer and sees a ball of paper there, noticing that it's from the 17th Castellan, congratulating the boy, even though he doesn't even know who he was when he wrote that letter. If he found it, it must mean that he is the new Castellan. Even the paper doll acts against him, and he says that he must be thinking a lot about how to govern Gorgon Castle. The protagonist questions what it is and if it's magic paper, noticing that it's not. It's a doll made with psychic power. Then the Castellan tells him to relax, because the Castellan only has one job, which is to seek pleasure, and a good Castellan is one who, it's very entertaining. He should leave public security for the administrative division, and leave internal matters to the internal commander, and external matters to the external commander. They took great care of that. Well, everything is fine, and he's not the first to give this advice. It's wisdom passed down through 3 generations of Castellans. The protagonist realizes that all the previous Castellans were lazy, and the Castellan explains that, according to Huang's statistics, half of the Castellans were overworked, which accelerated their spiritual corruption, resulting in their deaths. The protagonist understands that this advice isn't just for him, but also for Gorgon's sake, hoping he won't be greedy. He tells him not to try to change anything or overexert himself, because everyone there knows that this world cannot change. That's why change isn't necessary in this world, but rather a prolongation of life. Therefore, he shouldn't do anything for the good of many, instead of seeking change for the good of a few. And please, he asks the boy not to be greedy, all while G emanated that aura. And he says that the only a good Castellan in chaos. He's a Castellan who does nothing. And the protagonist says he's beginning to understand the kind of existence the Castellan of this place has, an existence that loses hope for the sake of remaining alive, an existence that prevents change from happening for the sake of many lives. But then, Yeren goes to him, asking what's worrying him so much. And the protagonist tells him he's going to eliminate the Gorgon Castellan. Yeren questions what that means, and the protagonist says he has to start there, asking Yeren what a castle is. Yeren says that's a strange question, explaining that a castle is a fortress, and a fortress is a military structure that protects allies against enemies. The protagonist then asked what happens if the enemies no longer exist, wondering what will happen if no one ever invades the castle. Yeren is surprised, hinting that the castle will no longer have a reason to exist. And in that case, the Castellan will no longer be necessary. However, he says, a castle without enemies is impossible, but the protagonist says it is possible because he will unify the chaos. Wow, Egon Targaryen, go for it. Unify the 7 kingdoms. I'm saying this because I started with House of Dragons, finished it, or at least watched it up to where it was released, and now I'm going to Game of Thrones. I'm not going to read your comment if it has any spoilers, and I'll even block you from the channel. Oh, but it was released in 2011. Yes, I'm only watching it now. I'm behind the times, and I don't want spoilers. Please don't make me block your messages forever on this channel. Okay, I'll be back in a while to tell you that I've reached the last season, and we've also reached the end of this video. The next video will definitely be about that, because you've already liked it, commented below, hyped it up, and subscribed, and remember to check if you're subscribed. If you've done all that, we'll definitely see each other in the next video, and I'll see you there. Bye.